He who sees Dhamma, see Dhammas, Dhamma in early Buddhism. The basic subject of the present article in the understanding of the concept of Dharma in early Buddhist literature, in the Nikayas, Agamas, and early Abhidharman text, as it is clear that early Buddhist texts were composed in some form of Middle Indic, and as many sources will be Pali text, I shall generally use the Pali Middle Indic form Dhamma. There are three basic problems that I think need to be considered in order to present a clear account of the distinctively Buddhist understanding of Dhamma. We need to establish the range of meanings found in early Buddhist literature. We need to consider the relationship between those different meanings and how they evolved. We need also to consider the relationship of distinctively Buddhist usage of Dhamma to the usage and understanding of Dharma more generally in Indian literature and thought, and especially in early Brahmanical writings. These problems are, of course, not entirely separable. Clearly, how we map out the different early Buddhist uses and their relationship will affect how we understand the Buddhist usage in relation to the non Buddhist usage. But equally, how we map out the different early Buddhist uses and their relationship in the first place depends in part on how we understand the Buddhist usage in relation to the non Buddhist usage. Moreover, the complexities and subtleties of the broader Brahminical and the Hindu usage mean that there is hardly a scholarly consensus on how best to pick up and follow the trail of the elusive spirit of Dharma beyond the field of Buddhist literature. In the present context, then, what I should like to do is devote some space, first of all, to a consideration of the range of meanings Dhamma has in early Buddhist text, and then move on to a consideration of the evolution and the development of the distinctively Buddhist usage and how these might relate to the Vedic and early Brahmanical usage. As one of the basic terms of Buddhist thought, Dharma, has been the subject of number of studies and articles over the last centuries or so. Mostly scholars have focused on the first problem identified above, the range of meanings found in early Buddhist literature. Although they have offered some observations and even theories about the development and evolution of its usage in Buddhist thought, less perhaps has been said about the relationship between the distinctively Buddhist usage and the usage in Indian thought in general. Three books devoted to the subject of Buddhist Dhamma or Dharma deserve special mention here. Special mention as being representative not only of the information about Dhamma Dharma that modern scholarship has presented on the basis of the study, Buddhist textual sources, but also of somewhat different approaches and emphases in the considering the significance of that information. The first is the pioneering study of Magdalene and Wilhelm Jaeger, Pali Dhamma, Warnell Mitch in der Kanischen Literatur, published in 1920. Now, this is a comprehensive philological study divided into four main sections, each of which consider a different set of meanings of the term Dhamma. The basic method in one of the cataloging and grouping the different uses and meanings and providing illustrative quotation from the Pali canonical literature. The four sets of meanings center around law, teaching, truth, and thing. This last meaning of Dhamma refers to the use of the term Dhamma in early Buddhist texts to characterize simple mental and physical states and phenomena as Dhammas. Jagers regard this usage of Dhamma as far removed from its original usage and identify the issue of how Dhamma comes to be used in this way as a principal question to be addressed in accounting for the development of the usage of the term Buddhist text. 3 years later, Stich published the Central Conception of Buddhism and the Meaning of the Word Dhamma. Referring to the Jagers' achievement in having drawn up a concordance of nearly every case where the word Dhamma occurs in Pali, canonical literature, and having established a great variety of meanings, he commented that among the various meanings there is indeed only one that really matters, that is specifically Buddhist technical term Dhamma. This specifically Buddhist technical term of Dharma, Stich expresses as element of existence, and he takes as a basis for its expositions not the literature of Pali canon, but 4th or 5th century CE work of Buddhist systematic thought, namely Vasubandhu, Abhidharmak Sobhashya. Rather than seeking to consider the various meanings of dharma or dhamma and their relationship, Stritsbursky focus on just one meaning and attempt to provide a precise philosophical account of the Buddhist conception of dharma, an element of existence. Just over half a century later, there is one more philosopher, John Ross Carter. He published another book length study, Dhamma, Western Academic, and Sinhalese Buddhist Interpretation. If the judge's focus was basically linguistic and philological, and Sticker-Batsky is philosophical, then Carter's is more broadly religious. He began with a survey of the account of the Dhamma Dharma given in modern scholarly studies, beginning with the work of Burnoff, and taking into account writings by Spence Hardy Childers, T.W., and C.A.F. Rides Davids, Oldenburg, Bech, Jegers, Keith, Stigbatsky, Glasenapp, Thomas Horner, Lamotte, Conze, among others. He then turned his attention to the understanding of the Dhamma and specifically the Theravada Buddhist tradition, focusing not only on the Pali canonical text but also on the way Dhamma has been understood in the Pali commentaries and exegetical work as well as in later vernacular Sinhala literature. Carter states explicitly that Dharma theory and the role of Dhammas in Buddhist systematic thought is not his main focus. His book instead seeks to explore and bring out the potency of Dhamma as a religious concept. It is a teaching of a Buddha, a fully awakened being. It is a path of religious practice, an object of devotion worthy of reverence, whose qualities are to be recollected and pondered by the practitioner in order to inspire faith and engender claim. It is a transcendent reality and salvific truth. What I have said so far has already introduced some of the principal meanings of Dhamma, Dharma that modern scholarship has identified in early Buddhist usage. In fact, while different scholarly authors might identify fewer or more meanings, give more or less emphasis to a particular aspect of the early Buddhist understanding of Dhamma or present the relationship between the different meanings in different ways, there is a basic consensus in the range of meanings identified. While no particular writer presents the usage of the term Dhamma in precisely the following terms, I think this consensus can be summed up by way of 6 basic meanings: the teachings of Buddha, good conduct or good behavior in general, but also more specifically in putting into practice of the good conduct described by the Buddha's teaching and pre-constituting the Buddhist path, namely keeping ethical perspectives. Sila, developing calm and concentration and insight and knowledge through the practice of meditation. The truth realized by the practice of Buddha path, any particular nature or quality that something possesses, the underlying and objective natural law or order of the things which the Buddha has discerned, a basic mental or physical state or thing, a plurality of which, at least in the text of Abhidham, become explicitly to be conceived as in some sense constituting the reality of the world or experience. While the order of presentation here is intended to be suggestive of possible affinity between certain meanings, it is not intended to indicate a judgment about which meanings have priority, either in terms of normative usage or in terms of historical development. Having, with the help of the work of earlier scholars, identified and set out this range of basic meanings, what I should like to do now is to consider them more closely with specific reference to the Pali Nikayas in order to illustrate and establish, at least provisionally, the extent to which they do indeed reflect the usage of early text. Teaching. To say that Dhamma in certain Nikayas context, meaning the teaching of Buddha, is to say that it can refer to both the content of his teaching. What if he taught the collection of instructions and doctrines taught by the Buddha, and to the text that contain and set out those teachings? In the Nikaya period, the later are of course oral compositions rather than writing text, and often conceived as comprising 9 parts, Ang. But later they are referred to as consisting of only 3 baskets, Pitak, or collection of Vinay, Sutta and Abhidham. A clear example of this kind of usage would be sentence: a monk learned the teaching, the discourse, chant, analysis, verses, utterances, saying, bird stories, marvels, and dialogues. Second is good conduct and behavior. Now, typical usage of the term dham in broad sense of good, right, or proper behavior and conduct is in the context of the rule of kings. Kings are described as ruling righteously or justly, or as practicing justice or righteousness. More generally, a person may acquire a possession, a property, or lawfully he may acquire it improperly or unlawfully. And while Dhamma is characteristically used to refer a good, right, and proper behavior, we should note that it can be used more neutrally of conduct and behavior. Thus, people indulge in the practice of sexual intercourse. It is in the context of this use of Dhamma in the sense of proper conduct and behavior that we need to understand the extension of the use of the term Dham to refer to the practices taught by the Buddha for the benefit of goods, gods, and men. So, monks, these practices that I have taught to you for the purpose of higher knowledge, having properly grasped them, you should practice them and develop them, make them mature so that spiritual life might continue and endure long. This will be for the good of the many, for the happiness of the many, for the sake of the compassion for the world, for the benefit, good, and happiness of goods and man. And what are those practices? Just these, the four ways of establishing mindfulness, the four right endeavors, the four bases of success, the five faculties, the five power or seven factors of awakening, the noble eightfold path. The significant point about the use of Dhamma in such a passage as this is that it clear that at least of the four ways of establishing mindfulness, the four right endeavors, the four bases of successes, and noble eightfold path referring to the things one does or practice, they are not teaching or text. Where the five faculties, power, and factors of awakening can be so straightforwardly characterized as practices, perhaps need further consideration. I shall return to this presently. Third is truth. In certain contexts, meanings such as teaching or practice seem not to fit. A meaning closer to truth, the truth about the world or reality as directly realized and taught by the Buddha, seem to be required. Thus, in a number of places like the Nikayas, it is described how the Buddha, by means of step-by-step instruction, leads his listeners to a vision of the truth. He talks of giving, virtuous conduct, heaven, reveals the danger, vanity, and impurity of the saint's desires, and benefit of desirelessness. When he sees that the heart of his listeners are ready, open, and without hindrance are inspired and confident, then he revealed the teaching of the truth that is special to Buddhas. Suffering, its arising, its cessation, the path, and the conclusion of such step by step instruction, there arises in his listeners the clear and spotless vision of the truth. The listeners are now ones who have seen the truth, gained the truth, know the truth, penetrated the truth, gone beyond doubt, removed their questioning, and acquired full confidence in what is taught by the teacher without having to rely on others. Taking Dhamma as close to the truth as opposed to teaching or practice would also mean to appropriate in such statement as well known: he who sees Dhamma sees me, he who sees me sees Dhamma, or he who sees dependent arising sees Dhamma, he who sees Dhamma sees dependent arising. That Dhamma in this statement means something like truth is reinforced by the way in which in context they are illustrated by the accounts of precisely the early Buddhist understanding of truth about the way things are: physical form, feeling, recognition, volitions, consciousness are impermanent sufferings and not to be taken as self. The five aggregates of attachments arise dependent on factors and conditions. Some scholars have suggested that Dhamma, in the sense of truth, become hypostasized as the highest metaphysical principle, equivalent to the Atman Brahman of the Upanishad, almost personified. Such an interpretation is, of course, controversial and certainly problematic from the point of view the interpretation of traditional Theravadi Buddhism. Nature. Fourth point. In the passage referred to the previous paragraph, the particular vision of truth that the listeners are said to have at the end of the Buddha's instructions is described in each case in the following terms. The Dhamma of everything whose Dhamma is this to arise, is it to cease, The term Dhamma used at the end of the Bhavurthi compound in this manner has to mean something like nature or characteristics quality. The nature of everything whose nature it is to arise, to cease. Similarly, in the discourse on establishing mindfulness, a monk is instructed to practice watching the nature of the things to arise and fall away in the case of the body, feeling, and consciousness. The use of a dhamma, at the end of a compound in the sense of a particular nature or quality possessed by something is a common usage in both Pali and Sanskrit and is not a specifically Buddhist usage. We shall return to this usage later. Fifth point is natural law. Now, given that truth one sees when one sees Dhamma is that the nature of everything whose nature is to arise is to cease. It might seem that truth that Dhamma is understood as some kind of law of the universe. A number of modern scholars and interpreters have this suggested that Dhamma signifies the natural law or order which the world or reality conforms to. Thus, T.W. Rice Davids and William Stead in their dictionary articles speak of the Dhamma preached by the Buddha as the order of the law of the universe, immanent, eternal, uncreated, not as in. Thus, T.W. Rice Davids preached and William Stead in their dictionary articles speak of the Dhamma preached by the Buddha as the order of the law of the universe, immanent, eternal, uncreated, not as interpreted by him only, much less invented or decreed by him, but intelligible to a mind of his range and by him made so to mankind as bodhi, revelation, awakening. Seeing Dhamma as one some form of eternal natural order or law would appear to be more interpretative suggestion for the meaning of Dhamma than those that we have so far considered, in that it is harder to cite passages where the translation natural law or universal law is clearly required by context that to be given preference over other translations. The kind of passage referred to in order to illustrate the kind of understanding of Dhamma are those which speak of the way things arise in dependence upon other things, or of how the mental and physical factors that make up the world are all impermanent sufferings and not self, and then refer to the fact as Dhamma Titat, the Dhamma Niyamant, and that endures whether or not Buddha arise in the world. Certainly, these last two expressions might be translated the constancy of nature, the law of nature, and one could also suggest that the statement quoted above, he who sees dependent arising sees Dhamma, might be rendered as he who sees dependent arising sees the law. Yet it does not follow from such translations that we should necessarily hypostatize Dhamma and conceive of it as some form of immanent, eternal, uncreated law of the universe. Possibly these two expressions should be interpreted as the constancy and law of Dhammas, plural rather than Dhamma singular, and this brings us to the sixth sense of Dhamma, that is, metal or physical state or thing. Now we come to know to the use of the term Dhamma in a manner that it as some once the most distinctively Buddhist or the hardest to offer us suitable translations for before considering the question of appropriateness or not of particular translations. Let us consider some examples of this usage. Now a monk endeavors so that bad and wholesome dhammas that have not risen do not arise. He endeavors so that bad wholesome dhammas that have arisen are abandonment. He endeavors so that wholesome dhammas that have not arisen arise. He endeavors so that wholesome dhammas that have arisen are constant, not lost, increase, grow, develop, and complete. Among 12 watching dhammas as dhammas. Now quite clearly to understand and translate dhammas as teachings, truth, law, whether of nature or otherwise, simply will not to do the above context. Practices just might mark in the first passage, but to think of practices as things that have arisen or not arisen, as such a translation would demand in the second passage, must rule it out. And when we read the full exposition of what watching Dhamma as Dhammas involves, such a conclusion is only reinforced. The monk dwells watching Dhamma as Dhamma in terms of the 5 hindrances: sensual desire, aversion, sleepiness and tiredness, excitement and depression, doubt, knowing whether each is present in him or not, how each arises and is abandoned such that it will not arise again. Now the 5 aggregates of attachment: physical form, feeling, recognition, volitional formation, consciousness, how each arises and disappears, the six senses and their respective objective fields, knowing the fetters that arise dependent on the two, how these fetters arise and are abandoned such that they will not arise again. The seven constitutes of awakening: mindfulness, Dhamma investigation, vigor, joy, tranquility, concentration, equanimity, knowing whether each is present in him or not, how each arises and is brought to full development. The Four Noble Truth, knowing what suffering is, what is the arising of suffering is, what the cessation of suffering is, what is the way leading to the cessation of suffering is. Clearly, if watching Dhamma involves watching the hindrances, the aggregates, the senses and their objects, and the constituents of awakening, then Dhamma are not teachings, practices, truth, or laws. And while it might be possible in some contexts to take the Nikayas as presenting the Four Noble Truths as four doctrinal propositions, suffering is the five aggregate of attachment. The kind of usage above challenges such a notion. Now, suffering, its arising, its cessation, the way leading to its cessation are here not truth in the sense of doctrinal propositions, but realities that have to be understood. So, what are the Dhammas? Now, in many ways, it is the usage of Dhamma at the end of the Bahurvirihi compound in the sense of a particular nature or quality possessed by something that seems the best fit in the present context. Only here, the particular nature or qualities are not possessed by anything. They are natural qualities in their own right, which the meditating monk watching arising and disappearing, some of which he strives to stop arising, and some of which he strives to keep arising. We can define dhammas in the final sense as basic qualities, both mental and physical. When we consider this particular understanding of what adhamma is alongside the defining of the world or experiences in its entirety in terms of five aggregates or the 12 spheres of sense, then we can go one step further and say that dhammas are the basic qualities, both mental and physical, that in some sense constitute experience or reality in its entirety. What I think is undeniable is that whether or not one accepts this as something as the Buddha himself taught, this sense and basic understanding of a Dhamma is firmly established and embedded in the Nikayas. Indeed, I think it is not unreasonable to suggest that it is the prevalent usage of the word Dhamma in the Nikaya. It is, of course, a usage that approximates to the one found to the Abhidharm, and the question of the relationship of this Nikaya usage to the more technically precise Abhidharma usage is something that I shall return to below. But before doing that, I wish first to consider how the Pali commentaries approach the issue of the different sense of the word Dhamma in the Nikayas. Dhamma and Dhammas in Pali commentaries. Obviously, the commentaries offer a rather more developed understanding of the Dhamma than the found in the Nikayas and early Abhidham. Nevertheless, their understanding represents a tradition of interpretation that is still relatively close to the earlier text and provide us with important points of references for plotting the development of the usage of the term in early Buddhist thought. A number of scholars have paid some attention to the traditional exposition of Dhamma presented in the Pali commentaries, and the Gilgers and PED, for example, both begin their account by citing list of meanings for Dhamma found in the commentaries to the Dig Nikaya, Dhammapad, Dhammasangani. But in the John Ross Carter work that provide the fullest account of the understanding of the Dhamma found in Pali commentaries, drawing on especially Carter work, I wish to highlight what seems to me the most significant aspect of ways of the early Buddhist exegetical tradition approaches the notion of Dhamma. Some 6 passages from the Pali commentaries explicitly explain that in the canonical text, the word Dhamma can have various meanings, which they go on to list. The number of meanings listed range from 4 to 11, although each list is explicitly open-ended. In aggregate, 18 different possible meanings are suggested. Having listed the possible meanings, the commentaries proceed by citing illustrative passages from the canonical text, mostly the Nikayas and Abhidham. These 18 meanings can, I think, be grouped and understood by way of 5 principal meanings that have broadly corresponded to the 6 meanings identified above: teaching first, teaching or text; second, good qualities or conducting more generally; third, truth; fourth, the natural condition of something; fifth, a mental or physical quality in technical. Abhidham sense. Let me commonly brief on these in turn. The first meaning is straightforward. Dhamma can mean the teaching of Buddha and the text that contain those teachings, defining a word of Buddha containing three pitak. I have grouped the next set of meaning together in that way all the dharma in the sense either of the general good qualities and conduct promoted by Buddhism practice on our specific example of these qualities and conduct. I have also grouped with these examples of Dhamma in a more general sense of practice in the Vinayadham is used to refer in the various categories of offense, as in the four of offenses involving defeat. What I have listed in the third meaning of Dhamma identifies by commentaries against straightforward, inserting context. Dhamma should be taken as meaning of the truth, or more specifically, the four truth, more or less in the same way that I have already outlined above. Now, the fourth meaning of natural condition is once again unproblematic in that it corresponds straightforwardly to a meaning that we have already noted. Dhamma is the last member of a compound means the natural condition possessed by something. Thus, to describe something as Jaradham means that birth and old age are his natural condition. An alternative term used by the commentaries here is vikar in the sense of disposition. Now, under the fifth heading, I have grouped 8 distinct meanings that all relate in various ways to the technical abhidham, understanding of the dhamma as basic mental or physical quality. Now, these 8 meanings fall in the 4 subsets. As I have suggested above, the word dhamma is quite clearly already used in Nikayas in the sense of basic quality, both mental and physical, a plurality of which in some sense constitute experience on reality in its entirety. A dhamma is the sense of one of these basic qualities may be defined in the commentaries as a particular nature. The canonical passage referred to for the meaning of dhamma in the sense of sabhav is the Abhidham matrix of triplets. That is set out at the beginning of Dham Sangni and is used on the basis of expositions in that text. The Vibhang, Dhatukatha, Pathan, it begins wholesome qualities, unwholesome qualities, and remind qualities. I shall return to the Abhidham and understanding of Sabhav below. We next have 3 terms having no essence, being lifeless, and being empty. Now, these are perhaps best understood as relating to the understanding of Dhamma on basic qualities to the notion of non-self. As illustrative of Dhamma, in these senses, the commentaries consistently cite 2 passages. The first is a section of Dhamma Sangini, explicitly called the section on emptiness in the text, which occur after the various mental dhamma or qualities that arise together, constituting an instance of consciousness, have been set out and defined in detail. The section states simply that at the time there are dhamma, there are aggregates, there are sense spheres. What the commentaries seem to be suggesting is that the stating that the Dharma Sangini emphasize that these dhammas, constituting an instance of consciousness, are nothing but immancent and unsubstantial non-entities that have no real essence or life of their own. The second passage cited by the commentaries in this context is that one I have already conferred to above, the passage describing the 4th way of establishing mindfulness by watching dhammas and dhamma. In other words, when the meditator watched dhammas or dhamma in the manner described by Satipathan Sutta, what the commentaries are suggesting is that what he is watching is the arising and disappearance of nothing but evanescent and substantial non-entities that have no real essence or life of their own. This ties is this way of Buddha Ghosh later alludes to the number of images and smiles from the Nikaya to illustrate the manner in which dhammas that are not lasting or solid but rather things that vanished almost as soon as they disappear, like dewdrops at sunrise, like a bubble on water, like a line drawn on water, like a mustard seed placed on the point of an awl, like a flash of lightning, things that lack substance and always elude one's grasp, like a mirage, a conjuring trick, a dream, the circle formed by a whirling firebrand, a fair city, form, and the trunk of banana tree. The third subset comprising the terms each of which brings out the manner in which a dhamma is understood as a casual condition itself, and as something that has arisen as a result of casual condition. Seeing dhammas in this way, while not perhaps explicit in the Nikayas, is none the less certainly implicit. Thus, again, the description of how the meditator is to watch Dhammas, as Dhammas focuses in particular on the conditions which lead to the arising and abandoning of particular Dhammas. Finally, we have two terms that focus on Dhamma as objects of consciousness. Dhamma are things that can be known, and they are concepts. The last meaning of Dhamma relates to the way Dhammas are presented in the list of six senses: eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, and their corresponding objective fields: visible forms, sounds, smells, taste, tangible sensation, and Dhamma. As Giger and Carter noted in trying to evaluate the list of terms offered as possible meanings of Dhamma, by such commentarial passages we should not forget that they end with an etc. and are thus sages explicitly open-ended. In fact, it is clear that such list of meanings do not exhaust the commentarial and exegetical understanding of Dhamma. There are two particular aspects of the commentarial understanding of the Dhamma that Carter has drawn attention to and which I should like to pick up on. The first concerns the understanding of Dhamma in terms of 9 transcendent Dhammas. The second is the understanding of in the term of threefold division by the way of text, practice, and realization or attainment. At the beginning of the discussion of the meditation practice of recollecting Dhamma, Buddhi Ghosh make a recollection between Dhamma as the text containing the teaching of Buddha on the one hand and transcendent Dhamma on the other. The latter is ninefold and comprises the fourth path of stream entry, one center non-return, and an artership, the four corresponding fruits and Nibbana itself. Carter notes, citing some 40 examples that the Pali commentaries frequently suggest, that Dhamma in the Nikayas to be understood as referring to the 9 transcendent Dhammas. In the technical understanding of the commentaries, this refer to the 4 kinds of consciousness that arise as the attainment of the 4 path, the 4 kinds of consciousness that arise in the attainment of the fruits of those paths, and lastly Nibbana as unconditioned element object of those classes of consciousness. In other words, transcendent Dhammas consisting of mind that knows and sees Nibbana at the moment of awakening and also what is known and seen at that moment. Such a usage in fact corresponds more or less to the usage of a word like knowledge in English, which can be denote both the act of knowing as well as what is known. In several places in early Buddhist text, a list of 5 mental wastelands is itemized and explained. The second of these consists in having doubts about Dhamma. The commentaries take this means have doubts either about Buddhist text, that the word of Buddha consisting of 84,000 sections, or about realization, that the path is achieved by insight, the fruit by the path, and the Nibbana represents the stilling of all volitional formations. The understanding of the Dhamma as realization relates closely to its understanding as knowledge of Nibbana. Elsewhere, in explanation of the expression the true good Dhamma, this twofold understanding of Dhamma is expanded to threefold one: text, practice, and attainment, with practice taking as referring to the Buddhist practice in its entirety. Ascetic practices, percepts, concentration, insight, and attainment to 9 transcendent Dhammas. While the technical specificity of the commentarial explanation of Dhamma is often out of place in a Nikaya context, nevertheless the general meaning suggested by the commentaries are more or less constant in the range of meanings offered by modern scholars. One meaning, however, that is brought out by the modern scholars but is not highlighted by the commentators is that natural law. Nevertheless, as we have seen, some such meaning is certainly explicit in certain context. The development of Buddhist understanding of Dhamma. I noted above that Jesus regards the usage of Dhamma in the sense of nothing, as somewhat removed from its original usage, and they identify the use of how Dhamma comes to be used in the way as a principal question to be addressed in the accounting for development of usage, the term of Buddhist text. They go on to far some brief comments on the development of this usage, and they point out that the meaning of thing is associated particularly with plural usage, and that it is the plural usage Dhamma refer to the things that constitute the world of experience as perceived by the mind. It is in these things or norms that the Dhamma, the law of the world, the nature consisting in the arisinal and disappearance. The fleetiness and emptiness of reality become manifest. Thus, the Jijar wished to see Dhamma in the sense of law of the world, or perhaps ultimate truth about the reality, as basic. And the things that constitute reality eventually come to be designated laws or truth, because seeing them one sees the law, the truth. While I think this account certainly resonates with the early Buddhist understanding of Dhamma, I do not think it adequately explains the semantic development of the world, and I shall suggest an alternative model presently. More recently, Richard Gombrich has offered a somewhat different account. Gombrich offered his account of the history of the way the word dhamma is used as a way of tracing the development of Buddhist ontology. His starting point is that dharma of Buddha is both the Buddha's account describing his experience and a message prescribing what to do about it. The basic Buddhist understanding of Dhamma and the Dharma, and this alike insofar as they at once describe the nature of reality and prescribe how to act. They thus both obliterate the fact value distinction, turning to the using of Dhamma in the plural to denote noita, phenomena, or things as the objects of consciousness. Gombrich found the keys to this development in meaning of the passages from the Satipatthana Sutta, describing the practice of watching Dhammas and Dhamma. Gombrich concludes by suggesting that it is from this specific context of meditation that the usage of Dhammas in the plural sense has become generalized. If I have understood him correctly, Gombrich's theory is then that watching Dhammas as Dhamma originally signified contemplating or rethinking about the teaching of the Buddha. And because thinking about those teachings involves seeing the world in a Buddha's way, what you see when you think, though, those teachings are the teachings which have come to represent experiences entirety for the meditator. While once again I think that the way this account ties together different senses and the word Dhamma has genuine resonances with the early Buddhist understanding of Dhamma. I don't think it works as an account of the history of the way the word Dhamma is used for two reasons. First, because I think taking Dhamma in the sense of teaching of the Buddha as starting point for the history of its use is problematic. Secondly, because as we saw above, apart from its four truth in Dhammas, the text spells out as objects of contemplation are not in fact the teachings of Buddha as such. Certainly, the Buddha of the Nikaya's teaching about the hindrances, aggregates, senses, and their objects, etc. But these things are not actual teachings. Moreover, if we were to understand Dhamma here in the sense of teachings about the hindrances, etc., we would be left with the problem of explaining why the watching of body as body, feelings as feelings, and consciousness as consciousness is not also included here under the heading of watching Dhammas as Dhammas. In fact, I think there is a much simpler way of approaching the development of the Buddhist usage of Dhamma in the sense of noita, phenomena, or things. In order to begin to understand the question of the relationship of the various meanings of Dhamma in early Buddhist literature, and the question of the development of the specifically Buddhist notion of Dharma as a basic mental or physical quality, we need first of all to consider what notion and understanding of Dharma Buddhist thought inherited and thus started with this. This, however, must remain a problematic and even controversial issue, both because of the problems in dating particular understanding of the Dharma in relation to the Buddhist development and because of the problems in agreeing the contours of the Hindu understanding of Dharma. Nevertheless, I think it is possible to map out some general lines of development. The beginning of the Indian concept of dharma go back to usage of noun dharman and the various verb forms derived from the root dhar in Rig Veda. A well-known example occurs at the close of Hymen of the Man, Purush Sukta. In his discussion of the Vedic usage of dharman, Havbas emphasized that the plural usage is the norm, commenting that only later did an essentially singular use as a complex or totality of binding norms gain or prominence. Now, the precise meaning of dharman in Rig Veda is perhaps unclear. It is a verse just quoted, or Flaherty uses ritual laws, explaining in a note that these are an orchestral pattern of behavior established during the first sacrifice to serve as the model for all future sacrifices. In a study of Dharman in Rig Veda in the present volume, Joel Breton emphasized the sense of foundation, a sense which straightforwardly reflects etymology as a form and the meaning common to the various contexts in which it is used. He translates, he goes on to comment that the first foundation can thus be understood as the model sacrifice instituted by the gods and replicated in human performance, or as he put it later, they are the ritual precedents which the present ritual follow. Halfbass likewise stresses the importance of the sense of underlying root dharmas are those things that support, uphold, maintain, and referring to the work of Scherer. He characterizes dharma in Brahmans as the continuous maintaining of the social and cosmic order and norm which is achieved by the Aryans through the formation of his Vedic rites and traditional duties. A.K. Warder, to consider the primary sense of dharman in the Rig Veda is closely connected with the idea of maintaining. Whatever the precise connotation of dharman in its earlier usage, It seems clear that the practice is primarily sacrificial rite, as maintaining and supporting things, the cosmic and social order. The underlying assumptions is of a good thing. Dharmas are therefore prescribed practices. Another dharman or foundation that the Rig Veda identifies suggested Biraton, the foundational authority especially of Varun and Mitra. The authority consists in commandants of Varuna and the alliance is governed by Mitra. The sense of authority is one then Patrick Olive's contribution to the present volume shows being taken up in Brahmins, where dharma is understood as a social order founded on the authority of especially the kings. And if these are the sources for Brahminic in general, Hindu understanding of dharma so too are, they say. For the Buddhist, it take in there that the plural usage of dhamma is something that early Buddhism inherited from early pre-Buddhist usage, and that for early Buddhist thought, dhammas are in the particular place the practices, the kinds of behavior prescribed and recommended on the authority of the Buddha. That the plural teaching is then a straightforward development. Just the English word prescription can denote both the act of prescribing and what is prescribed. Indeed, prescription can also denote a piece of paper handed to one by a doctor. So we have an analogous development for the ways in which Dhamma comes to mean that contain the teachings of the Buddha. In fact, all that ties is precisely with the general tendency of early Buddhist thought to appropriate Brahminical terminology and reinterpret in its own terms. The true Brahmana, the true Arya, is not someone who is born as such and performs the duties and rites. The dharmas laid down in the Vedas, the real Arya Pugla or noble person is the one who takes up the practices, the dhammas, recommended by the Buddha and root out greed, hatred, delusion. Though the Patrick Oliver points out again in his contribution to this volume, the relationship between the Buddhist and the Brahminical understanding may be more complex while the Buddhists take over the basics of the Vedic and Brahminical understanding of Dharma. The manner in which the notion of Dhamma function as a pervasive concept of religious, philosophical, ethical discourse is perhaps characteristically Buddhistic, and Dharma is developed as a central concept of Hindu thought, only subsequent as a reaction to Buddhist and especially Ashokan usage. Be that as it may, the use of dharma in Vedic literature in the sense of foundational rituals and foundational authority is sufficient to account for the development of early Buddhist Dhamma in its normative and prescriptive senses. But what of its descriptive senses? What of dharma as a truth about the ways things are? In the course of his discussion of dharma in Hinduism, Halves comments, in fact, the usage of dharma in the sense of property or characteristics attribute would seem to derive directly from the Vedic usage of dharma to refer to the foundational nature of the deity. While there are also several places in the Brahmins and Upanishads where dharma appears to be used in sense close to qualities, attributes, or even just things. The passage of Satpat Brahman that Halfbus cites is one in which the dharma occur as last member of Bahuvriti compound. The same passage is also found in the Brihadranayak Upanishad. This self-usage is imperishable. It has an indestructible nature. The linking of the technical philosophical use of dharma in the sense of an attribute belonging to an underlying substratum to its usage as the last member of a Bahuvrihi compound is crucial. We have already noted that this kind of usage is common in early Buddhist texts, and again it would seem that it is common usage inherited from earlier usage. So to expand on Halfbest's remarks to describe Y and X dharma is to say that Y is something that possesses the dharma, the attribute, the quality that is X. And philosophical as opposed to purely grammatical terms that something that possesses an attribute in an underlying substance. As Halfbest points out, of understanding of dharma and dharmin as attribute and substance respectively involves the use of dharma in terms of passive derivation. A dharma is what supported or maintained by underlying substance. I think we can see a precisely parallel development of the use of dhamma in Buddhist thought. In fact, I have already suggested that the early Buddhist understanding of dhamma as the basic mental and physical qualities that constitute experiences or realities to be related to the usage of dhamma at the end of the Bahuvrihi compound in the sense of a particular nature or quality possessed by something. To this extent, the basic qualities of early Buddhist thought and the attributes of Nyaya Varishika are the same things. The crucial difference, however, is that instead of understanding these particular nature of qualities as attributes that belong to some underlying substance, early Buddhist thought take them as natural qualities in their own right, emphasizing how they arise dependent on their qualities rather than on the substance that is somehow more real than they are. Seeing the development of the Buddhist understanding of the Dhammas in this way also casts a somewhat different light on some of the remarks made about the Dhammas in the Pali commentaries, which are perhaps often viewed too much in the light of the later controversies about the precise ontological status of dharmas, and the Madhyamak critique of the notion of Swabhav in the sense of inherent existence. John Ross Carter have drawn attention to the way in which the Pali commentaries later come to glose Dhamma at the end of the Bahuvrihi compound, both the Pakati and Sambhav. It follows from this that when the commentaries define Dhammas and Sabhavas, this is not a statement about their ontological status, and the Sabhava should not be translated as inherent existence, but is merely a glose stating that Dhammas are particularly nature or particular qualities. Moreover, when the commentators say that Dhammas are so called because they maintain their own particular nature or because they are maintained conditions, this should be understood, I think, as direct and deliberate counter to the idea of dharmas as particular nature that are maintained by an underlying subsistence, distinct from themselves. It is not intended to define dhammas as ontologically irreducible entities. This gives us two basic meanings of dhamma in early Buddhist text: the practices recommended by the Buddha and the basic qualities that constitute reality. The first dhamma is something normative and prescriptive, and the second is something descriptive and factual. Both of these terms, both of these meanings essentially derive from the pre-Buddhist usage, but are adapted to the specifics of Buddhist thought. The question of how the prescriptive and descriptive meaning of dharma related is a general one and not specific to Buddhist thought. Halvos refers to the work of Paul Hacker, who sees the self-conscious and deliberate linking of dharma in its prescriptive and descriptive sense as essentially modern and feature of Neo-Hinduism. The point here appears to that in ancient Hindu thought, there was no explicit attempt to derive dharma in its prescriptive sense from dharma in its descriptive sense. There was no explicit suggestion that it is because your nature is such, your duty is such. While this may be so, it is not clear to me that such an understanding is not implicit in early Indian thought. Indeed, without the latent idea that there is some sort of link between the nature and the norm, the way things are and the way we should behave, it seems to me difficult to explain the use of dharma in these two senses, unless, that is, one regard it as some sort of semantic accident or coincidence. In this context, the observation of the more philosopher Alasdair MacIntyre seem pertinent. MacIntyre argues that the 18th century European thinking about the morality involved the disappearance of hitherto taken from granted connection between the prospects of normality and the fact of the human nature, such that moral philosophers like Hume and Kant began to assert for first time that moral laws cannot be derived from factual statements and ought cannot be derived from an is. MacIntyre goes on to point out that this is problematic. A statement that someone is a sea captain suggests that he ought to do what a sea captain ought to do. This is because sea captain is a functional concept. Being a sea captain involves functioning as sea captain. What MacIntyre suggests is that in classical tradition right through to enlightenment, the concepts used in discussion of morality, how one should behave, were functional. Thus for Aristotle, a man living well is precisely analogous to a harpist playing well. The relevance of this in the present context is that if the definition between nature and norm is not made in the first place because a deep connection between the two is assumed, and there can be no explicit argument that derives dharma as duty directly from the dharma as nature in modern, in part of reflection perhaps of the conceptual framework of modern European philosophy, is hardly surprising. In fact, it seems clear that dharma from the very beginning itself is a functional concept. It is a foundation, and a foundation that fails to perform the functions of supporting and maintaining is not much a foundation. For something to be a dhamma, it must maintain and support. Thus, in the present volume, Bretonon suggests that in the Rig Veda there is a deep connection between the foundational nature of the Adityas and their foundational authority, such that they are one and the same thing. And certainly in the case of Brahmanical Dharma, it seems hard to deny a deep connection between being a member of a particular class at a particular stage of life and acting according fulfilling one's dharma. And when the Pali commentaries come to define the particular natures and the dharmas, they define them by what they do. It is contact because it contacts, because it wills, it is concentration because it places the mind evenly onto the object. It is trust because it trusts, it is memory because it remembers. Halbus refers to certain elusive coherence in various meanings and functions of dharma in different traditions of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. Now, this article has largely been an attempt to seek out the elusive coherence in the case of early Buddhist
Ideas and Institutions in Indian Political Thought. Unit name Dharma, Dhamma, Danda, that is Unit 2. Chapter name The Concept of Dharma, Margaret Chatterjee. This is the chapter 2 of Unit 2. I begin. The concept of dharma, roughly translated as righteousness, is one of the most challenging in Indian philosophical thought. It seems to cut across so many conceptual distinctions, legal, social, moral, religious, that to those attaching importance to these divides, it may appear to be less challenging than confusing. And yet, there is something fascinating about a term whose usage spans millennia and which gives evidence of a sustained effort to come to grips with the friction of fact and meaning, institution and ideal. To this day, to say that a man is dharmic or righteous indicates the highest commendation. Whether one ought to be dharmic or not is something which could be paralleled by whether or not one is moral. In both cases, to pose the query is to reveal that the speaker has asked a question which does not strictly make sense. The vast period of time over which the concept of dharma developed needs to be recalled. The early Vedic periods date from around 1500 BC, when the Aryans invaded India from the northwest and settled in the plains of Punjab. The Rig Veda, consisting of hymns in the praise of gods, might have been composed around 1200 to 1000 BC. This is the period when the concept of Rita, that is cosmic order, RTA, Rita, was born. Rita is both the law of righteousness and cosmic equilibrium and combines in itself the notion of an integrated whole in which gods, men, and nature participate. Page number 178. The whole thing was kept going by an intricate web of religious ceremonial which centered on various sacrifices to be made. The Vedas, whose message was believed to have been revealed to rishis or seers, were followed by elaborations called Brahmans, Aranyakas, and Upanishads. Their contents range from instructions as to how sacrifices should be performed to meditative works which are philosophico-poetic in nature. Shruti, what was heard, and Smriti, what was remembered, were regarded as Sanatan Dharma, eternal law, and passed on from generation to generation by word of mouth. The concept of Dharma evolved out of Rita and encapsulated the basic meanings of the latter, a proper course of which the natural powers of sun, earth, and sea suns, etc. were exemplars. Parallelism between the functional distinctions among the deities and their counterparts in society, and the role of both men and gods in preserving the balance of parts of all of this. That human beings live in families, clans, and other settled communities, that land and cattle have to be tended, and that what people do makes a difference to how things are, all are perceived as of the very nature of existence, but as nonetheless matters which are accompanied by certain ingrained responsibilities. The intermeshing of the natural and the normative is taken for granted. Maybe an agricultural people is well situated to grasp this. Etymologically, the root dra means to hold, have, or maintain. Dharma is an ontological principle, but is no less regulative. From about 6th century BC to the 12th century AD, the literature concerning Dharma proliferated into law books, the epic works of Mahabharata and Ramayana, the mythology of Puranas, and eventually the political thinking of the modern era. The ethico religious concepts of a traditional hierarchical society understandably concerned themselves in large part with relations of values and institutions rather than personality, based as the latter is on a principle of individuality. Dharma is a social concept. It did not function in isolation, but along with artha, wealth, and kama, desire, the three known jointly as three varga, threefold principles. Whatever brief later speculative thinkers came to hold in favor of moksha, that is, liberation, or upvarg, a principle beyond the three varg, it was the threefold values of artha, kama, and dharma which governed the lives of the majority. Early Indian thinking was frankly this worldly and concerned with practical matters having to do with the pursuit of prosperity, a matter which, after all, the rest of us do think of when the new year comes round. Meditative philosophic thought added what has been called the Atman-centric predicament. Atman meaning nominal self. The idea that there is not merely an attunement between the self and the ultimate reality, but as the Advait Vedantians would say, an identity between them. To bring in the concept of moksha, that is liberation, is to claim that man has a trans-social destiny which, while not cancelling out dharma, takes a man beyond it. This raises the whole question of the relation of the so-called purusharths, goal of men, to each other, and to this we must now turn. In Hindu thought, four goals of life values are spoken of. The three values that make up three varga plus moksha, which is of later origin. The definition of the first, artha, is given by Vatsyayana as follows. Artha is the acquisition of arts, land, gold, cattle, wealth, and friends. It's also the protection of what is acquired and the increase of what is protected. The arts referred to here are those of politics, commerce, techniques of survival, and so on. The connotation of artha indicates what people in an ancient India associated with prosperity. It includes the degree of independence involved in economic well-being and the ability to protect oneself. It is the realm of having, where this is regarded as the legitimate base for all other activities. To have land and cattle but no friends is to be poor indeed. Ritual activities were largely concerned with this dimension of life, and we find in fact a dual criterion of legitimation offered as far as artha is concerned, the religious and the pragmatic. The notion that wealth was profane would have been quite unintelligible to the ancient Hindu. An interesting gloss on the legitimacy of worldly pursuits was provided by Jnandev, the saint from Maharashtra, who asked a religious aspirant how he could attain moksha if he could not succeed in a lesser task, namely looking after himself and his family. The pursuit of kama, or the satisfaction of desire, is no less appropriate than the pursuit of artha. Vatsyayana wrote the Kama Sutra around AD 400, and it is clear that he thinks of desire in an extended way. Kama is the enjoyment of appropriate objects by the five senses of hearing, feeling, seeing, tasting, and smelling, assisted by the mind together with the soul. To say that karma concerns the erotic is to recognize its involvement with the fine arts. But as soon as we use the word appropriate in the context of the both acquisition of wealth and satisfaction of desire in their extended connotations, the need for a regulative principle comes apparent. And this is where dharma comes in. Although much of the literature on dharma suggests a rather frigid canonical model of precepts which must not be infringed upon, there is another side to the story, the one which legitimates what we in fact value while recognizing the need for a principle of regulation. Dharma is the third of Purusharth, and vis-a-vis the first two appears in the form of moral law. This is where the plot thickens. For dharma is not a monolithic concept but differentiates itself into the sorts of dharma to be followed through over the lifetime of man. The various dharmas are classified into sadharan dharmas, that is, ordinary dharmas, or those obligatory on all, varna dharmas, those varying with one's station in life, and ashrama dharmas, those varying with stages in life. Manu, about whose dates is much agreement among scholars. I moved to page number 180. We had started from page number 177. Manu, about whose dates there is much disagreement among scholars, summarizes the ordinary or general dharmas as harmlessness, truth, integrity, purity, and control of the senses, these being rough translations of the original terms. Varna dharma was in ancient times identified with caste duties, the original idea being this being much the same as the principle of my station and its duties. The implication is that general duties apart, many obligations vary in relation to one's function in society. The duty of the teacher, for example, differs from that of the soldier. The kind of crisis that Arjuna faces in the Bhagavad Gita illustrates the clash of the general duty of harmlessness or non-violence and the caste duty of the Kshatriya, member of the warrior caste, namely to fight. The problem of the conflict of duties remains as baffling as it does in any other system of thought, except that Indian reflection adds the injunction to examine one's true nature and proper course of action in keeping with one's true nature and to discover an overriding consideration therein. The message of the epic literature, however, might well be taken to be something like this. No matter how sincere the effort may be to do the best in the circumstances, there is a momentum in events and a destiny which shapes our ends and which leaves behind much that is disastrous. It is in order to set up a kind of protective barrier against this that the ancient Hindus laid such stress on equilibrium in society. The chaos that they envisaged was not of the cosmic kind that Greek imagination conjured up, but the nightmare possibility of a society where anything goes. It is almost as if they had glimpsed in an idea the cutthroat style of living of a competitive society and opted for a stratified society in which each man had his allotted slot. The factual and the prescriptive are mutually involved in an interesting way on such a model. Diversities of function are factual matters, and out of these set of obligation arises. There is also, along with such a view, the belief that traditional roles should be perpetuated on the ground that it is good to do what one can do best. Modern thinking would at this point come up with a query as to the role of judgment in all this. Are prescriptions to be read off, as it were, from rules? We need, I feel sure, to bear in mind the context of a traditional society whose economic life centered on crafts, which for centuries were perfected through skills handed down from father to son. Radical questioning and self searching held full sway in a different context, that of metaphysical thought. At the very everyday level, fact and evaluation remained bound together in the Hindu ethical thinking through appreciation of the components of situation and circumstance. This, this comment can be further borne out with reference to the third type of dharma, which varies with stages in life. The four ashramas, stages of life, are prescribed as brahmacharya, grahasthya, vanaprasth, and sannyasa. The first, student life, is typified in the life of preparation and self discipline. The full connotation goes beyond the narrower meaning of continence. The second, or householder stage, is where the facticity of the pursuit of artha and kama comes into full play. The dharma of the householder also sets on a value with the past in various ways: ceremonies for the benefit of ancestors, perpetuation of family lines, and the following of the teachings of sects and sages. The householder, situated in the present as he is bound by invisible but strong cords to the past and the future. These are the facts of his being where he is. His recognition of this as good and as indicating his role at his particular stage in life bears him up in this, the busiest part of his pilgrimage. The third stage, vanaprastha, retreat to the forest, is analogous to what we mean today by retirement, and significantly, in industrialized societies, it often takes the form of a shift from the city to the country. The difference is that whereas in our day we think of retirement as a time of new activities, especially new forms of sociality, the ancient Hindu thought in terms of gradual withdrawal from society, assimilating as he did societal bonds to bondage. The text goes into detail concerning change of diet and habits at this stage, much of which makes good sense. It's also worth remembering that Indian philosophy tends to blur the distinction between means and end, so that, to take an example, fasting is looked on both as instrumental to health and self purification, and as discipline as an end in itself. The retired man, free of familial obligation, is still within society and has obligations towards it. The Ramayana tells how Sita was looked after by Valmiki in his hermitage when she was alone in the forest. But since each stage can be regarded as a preparation for the next, the forest dweller stage gives all possessions. The forest dweller stage gives way to that of sannyasa, or complete renunciation. The ascetic is free of all possessions and also free from the practice of rituals. He has shed all attachment. While from one point of view, the sannyasin, the one practicing sannyasa, has gone beyond the bounds of society, from another point of view, a societal system that sanctions sannyasa is in fact making room almost as a safety valve for those who serving society best by being a friend to all. The discipline of 4 stages is a discipline of growth, of progressive non-attachment. Even the householder, who may be supposed to be attached to his family and his possessions, needs to learn that the time will soon come when all these have to be given up. The value put on detachment in the Indian tradition can also be seen as a determination not to be submerged by fact. Facticity was actually seen by Indian thinker above all in the prevalence of suffering in human condition. Buddha began his meditation on the condition of man with what suddenly struck him as most crucial about this condition: the inevitability of the facts of old age, sickness, and death. Was it out of rare courage or forgetfulness, that longevity was nevertheless regarded as good? Death was never regarded as a bourne from which no traveler returned, for the soul would return again and again until all potencies had been worked out. The longer the life, the more the opportunity to fulfill positive karmas and less need for too many births. Such may be the implicit motive behind this way of thinking. To phrase it like this is to see how the four ashramas are connected with the four purusharth, moksha, to which we turn next. If dharma means righteousness, moksha is actually translated as freedom or liberation. It might be useful at this point to compare the four purusharthas with Plato's distinction between iekesis, pistis, dionyia, and noesis. Plato's is a noetic ladder of ascent where, so the dividend line analogy tells us, there is a coherence between the first and the second and between the third and the fourth. The first two deal with sensible world and the latter two with the intelligible world. Plato is very clear on the point that there is no route for noesis other than through dionyia. Comparison with the purusharthas is suggestive. The bottom two are worldly. There is no route to the fourth other than via the third, but the progression is not a cognitive one. Moreover, the highest term is not spoken of in terms of the good, but rather incorporates the insight that freedom from the bondage of suffering is at first sight the highest state to which a human being can aspire. The metaphor of ascent in Plato is here paralleled by the metaphor of a journey within. Phenomenologically, no doubt, the triad of truth, beauty, and goodness is not the same as the triad of Sat, Chit, Anand, truth, consciousness, and bliss. Both express in different ways how the ultimate was conceived by two remarkable ancient cultures. The Platonic return of the cave resembles the Mahayana Buddhist position rather than the Vedantic one. And yet the Platonic and Vedantic viewpoints show considerable similarity and insight in their quest for the transcendent and their conceiving of this as an ethico-metaphysical endeavor. But whereas the shift from dionyia to noesis is a shift within the overarching framework of the intelligible, the transition from dharma to moksha seems more radical, and this now has to be elucidated. Even though the word dharmic serves in common Indian usage for both righteous and religious, equating these almost in a Judaic manner, there is a tendency among scholars to stress that religious, strictly speaking, goes beyond the realm of morality into the realm of realization. The nearest analogy to this position that I can think of would be regarding a holy will in the Kantian sense as a Kantian sense as a realizable ideal for the human being. On Kant's view, of course, it is no such thing. To proceed, we have already noticed that there is a profoundly ontological dimension about dharma. Dharma both is and ought to be. There is probably a similar tangle involved in discussions about value in some other systems of thought, too, in that values, core ideals, are in a paradigmatic sense. What is required from our own human perspective is an actualization of them in the course of life. The trouble is that if the supreme value is seen as beyond good and evil, as the concept of moksha has it, we are in the paradoxical position of lifting it out of the context of living altogether. Other problems include these: how to describe what is presumably beyond description, how to commend as a supreme terminus of the human quest what is supposed to be beyond the sphere of human judgment, and how to prescribe action in conformity with an ideal whose inner meaning connotes the very cessation of action, since all actions bind. The concept of moksha in Indian thought represents an extreme form of the urge to get away from fact. Hindu thought takes the web of human obligations to be, then, intricately structured indeed. A more person centered philosophy makes room for the ebb and flow of activities respecting others. The ancient Hindus retained what they regarded as the privilege of opting out of these activities for exceptional individuals whose special gifts, and these included inclinations, whose special gifts allowed them to leave aside normal social duties before they had been through the traditional sequence of stages of life. The rest of humanity, however, was in a sense condemned not to be free, or at least constantly reminded of the extent to which the world of getting and spending is ever with us. So there was also a concept of Jivan Mukti, freedom within this life, which some systems made room for, but this was envisaged in terms of detachment rather than anything else. The only route to moksha is through dharma, since freedom is seen on this view not as a presupposition of action, but as the culmination of life. It requires a switch in thinking to be able to regard freedom as in opposition to responsibility, freedom being attained after responsibilities are over, on the extreme form of the theory as against the Jivan Mukti form. This shows how different the Indian treatment of freedom is from what we may be accustomed to in other philosophical traditions. It all springs from the conviction, or more properly presupposition, for it does not seem to have been radically questioned except by the Karvakas and a few others whom orthodoxy probably suppressed, that the wheel of facticity must revolve, and that it is possible for man to acquit himself creditably in the assesses which ordinary living involves, but that the ultimate desideratum could be a state of being where empiricality would be completely overcome. There are branches of the Indian cluster of philosophies, Jainism and Hinayan Buddhism, where the highest value is placed on incorporeal existence, that is, a state of being after the death of the body. Hinduism at least had the merit of allowing the possibility of liberation during one's lifetime. If one recasts the idea of detachment, which goes along with this as a near stoic refusal to be overwhelmed by the devastating effects of circumstances, one perhaps comes close to what the concept might have meant in the life world for people who are distant in time and whose way of life has in large part to be reconstructed imaginatively. The theory of separate karmic lines prevented the Hindus from having an Atlas complex, seeing themselves as called upon to remedy the ills of the world. But that very karma theory did not stand in the way of Mahayana Buddhist compassionate concern to alleviate the suffering of humanity. Dharma and moksha, in fact, are concepts which cannot really be divorced from a host of other terms which we cannot deal here. Among these, the self, karma, samsara, and Brahman are the most important. Dharma is a concept which has much bearing on the way in which the empirical self, which is particularistic, is distinguished from the self seen in a transcendent manner, that is, as identical with ultimate reality or Brahman. Not all systems make this conflation, but the Vedantic way of thinking does. And it is this approach which has perhaps been philosophically the most influential in India to this day. Karma is the law of action, according to which wherever we do is retrospectively conditioned and prospectively determinative. It's not as cast iron and deterministic a concept as it sounds, for it accommodates the presence of unfulfilled potencies which permit leeway for choice. If it were not so, there would have been no place for the concept of dharma, which is clearly concerned with what one ought to do. This part of the theory can well be compared. For example, the Sartre's tandem affirmation of facticity and freedom, of course, just at the level of analogy. Samsara refers to the ongoing course of change to which human beings are subject in chain of births. It's a concept which in many ways takes the place of evil, for it is seen as something which is inexorable, terrifying, and yet challenging. Dharma is really the mitigating factor in a world governed by samsara, but from which moksha or liberation was believed to be both desirable and possible. The ancient Hindus were deeply conscious of the binding force of actions in the sense that whatever we do affects both ourselves and others. This being, quote unquote, condemned not to be free at the empirical level is the form which finitude takes in Hindu thought. The causes of this condition are further spelled out in terms of factors such as cosmic ignorance and inordinate craving. The language varies. In any case, it is taken for granted that man is destined for something else in spite of this vast cosmic trap, and this without benefit of a concept of an overriding providence who has a design for each of his creatures. It is this long-term prospect that poses a problem regarding the relation between dharma and moksha. If moksha is what is valued supremely, this seems to relegate dharma to what is to be finally transcendent to be finally transcended, and this looks very much like a philosophy of beyond good and evil, which would give us pause. We can move from this to certain other difficulties. Dharma, as has been shown, is a cosmic principle of ontological status, a principle of individual growth, swadharma, of one's own dharma, which is not a matter of choice but of discovery, and a regulative principle in the face of our relations with others. The sources of dharma are not confined to philosophical and legal texts, but also include customs, the habits of good men, and conscience of the enlightened. The last of these sources is especially relevant in modern times when reformist thinkers like Mahatma Gandhi have advocated a rethinking of dharma in order to bring about desirable changes in Hindu society. This is to say that the concept has been appealed to in recent times in order to justify change rather than to legitimize the status quo. Purely secular thinkers, however, have doubted the wisdom of invoking a concept which, on the whole, has had conservative connotations and, in their views, associated less with evaluating prevailing states of affairs than with perpetuating them. To what extent is dharma concerned with adjustment to a life bondage, and to what extent does it take us beyond it? The answer may need to combine both alternatives. In this respect, once more we have an analogy with other traditions which insist on the autonomy of the ethical and yet conceive it as a part of the spiritual. It certainly looks as if this concept of moksha takes us beyond the and is distinction of is and ought to be, but in the sense of being beyond good and evil. And yet, the liberated man is often referred to as one in whom the sattvic, which can be variously translated as purity, goodness, and the like, and guna, quality, prevails. Now, the three gunas, the other two being rajas, energy, and tamas, that is inertia. Rajas is energy and tamas is inertia, operate at the empirical level. It should be mentioned, however, that this way of putting it is more characteristic of the Sankhya system than of any other. The realized soul, according to the Upanishads, is gunatita, that is, beyond the guns. The matter, of course, needs to be taken historically. Never an easy thing to do in inquiring into Indian philosophy, noting the earlier connection of dharma with sacrifice in the Vedic era and later less ritualistic way of relating the temporal and the eternal, and its use as a ground for questioning norms and values. Although the etymological meaning of dharma is tied up with conservation, insights into what needs to be conserved evolve as time goes on. This shows the fertility of a concept which, although avowedly referring to what transcends space and time, what is sanatana or eternal, yet requires human agency to manifest it. This can be restated something like this. The man of moral integrity articulates being in his daily activities. This I believe to be an important insight in the context of relating authenticity both to adjudication between possibilities and therein plumbing an ontological stratum which must be accessible to us in some sense, clouded though our vision must needs be. In other words, in Heideggerian terminology, dharma straddles the ontological and the ontic. The treatise, which to my mind presents the whole question of the content of dharma in the most poignant way, is the epic Mahabharata. The Bhagavad Gita, which is a part of this, links up the imperturbability of the dharmic man with the faith in God. An element of grace enters what is otherwise rather a Pelagian model. The argument of the Gita passes over what would strike us today as a crucial matter, the role of individual conscience in situations where prima facie duty seems otherwise to be clearly indicated, and presents bhakti or devotion as the root of freedom. The medieval bhakti cults, we move to page number 186 now. The medieval bhakti cults expectedly had far less to say about dharma than say Manu did. More illuminating in my view is the stance taken by Yudhishthira in the Mahabharata, his realization that not only adharma brings sorrow, but also does dharma itself. This is deeply paradoxical insight for one who was said to be Dharmarai, the king of dharma or the dharma incarnate. We reach here a central theme in all epic literature: the apparent futility of human efforts, the devastation left behind after heroic deeds, the terrible solitude of the one who enters fully into the infinite extent of human suffering. The Mahabharata is believed to describe events which took place in around 1000 BC and was written somewhere around 200 to 400, 200 BC to AD 400. The original was called Jaya, which means victory. Victory can be hollow, an apparent future can be heroic. And this is but one of the many layers of meaning that can be discovered in this striking work. Another thing which the long history of the concept of dharma seems to me to show is that the clogging effect of fact on human ethical endeavor arises less from the bondage imposed by the physical world than from the intractable nature of human institutions. Both the legalistic aspect of dharma and its more general concern with the pattern of a life which is worth living brings out the intransigent character of those structures which man has made for himself. The structure of kingship and its responsibilities, familial obligations, and other societal frameworks seem to get snarled up in such a fashion that the path of duty is alternately unclear, hazardous, or an even deeper insight productive of catastrophes unintended by the agents. And yet, the regulative function of dharma is inevitably mediated through institutions. An epoch and a generation which struggles to recast institutions is in a position to appreciate this. Even so, a modern critique will certainly react against the non egalitarian bias of some of the attendant concepts. The idea of caste duties, for example. The non Hindu will find strange the notion of duties being performed with an eye to the merit believed to be built up thanks to proper performance. How was this concern for the accumulation of good karmas reconciled with the advocacy of disinterestedness? Was it a kind of wealth smurs that gave rise to the stress on moksha by later Hindu thinkers? Whereas moksha was a concept reserved for some of the philosophical systems, it was the concept of dharma which retained its hold over popular thought and practice. Almost every innovator in social thinking in modern era in India has appealed to dharma in the service of a critique of social factuality. Under the influence of various liberating tendencies in society, for example, it is commonly pronounced that caste is no longer associated with dharma. On the other hand, it is only fair to grant that dharma is also appealed to in defense of regressive positions. In conclusion, to my mind, the literature reveals not only a vérité de culture, but a vérité de la condition humaine. It takes the form of a strangely poignant grappling with the matters with which the volume is engaged, the contrast between facticity which enables and the facticity which embroils, the need for roots and the need for branches, the temptation to soar beyond the values embodied in everyday life and seek an empyrean beyond it. Here, etymology is suggestive. The sphere of fire, the sun, was as potent a symbol for the ancient Hindus as it was for Greeks. What beckons is a light which is blinding in its intensity. It is tapamya, the austerity which sears, which leads us in this direction. In the meantime, we are tried in the refiner's fire. the daily round and common task, the realm of dharma. That's all from my side.
Traditional definitions of the term Dhamma by John Ross Carter. Among the technical terms in the Theravada Buddhist vocabulary, perhaps none is so puzzling and comprehensive as the term Dhamma. For some time, Western scholars, philosophers, Buddhologists, historians, philologists, historians of religion have been considering this term, probing its denotations and connotations, occasionally becoming perplexed, often showing flashes of insight. Whereas a good deal has been written on what has come to be called Hindu Dhamma as a frame of reference for extrapolating patterns of ethical behavior in India, less has been done with the notion Dhamma in the Theravada Buddhist tradition. My intention in writing this brief article is not to become engaged here with the various interpretations offered for the many dimensions of meaning in the term Dhamma, or to express an opinion on the meaning of the term in one or another passage, or to argue that the term first carried one meaning and then another in an early or later century. This task, of course, would require a monograph. Rather, I wish to place before the reader traditional commentarial definitions offered by Buddhists and drawn from Pali and Sinhalese Theravada sources. This organizational plan was adopted for the following reasons. 1. Sources hitherto published in Western language have not provided a complete listing of passages in the Pali commentaries where the term Dhamma is discussed in detail. Second, the work of Professor Wilhelm and Mr. Magdalene Gijo, to be noted below, is limited to the meaning of the term in the canonical literature, with the exception of a brief passage in which some of the commentarial definitions are noted, and is no longer readily available. Third, the discussion of the term Dhamma or Dharma in Sinhalese Buddhist literature is, on the whole, unknown in the West. Fourth, one engaged in comparative studies, philosophical and religious, would have at hand, in a concise form, references to the passages to which one could turn to find the traditional definitions of the term. In short, one would have a lexical entry representing the standard definitions of the term that the Theravada Buddhist tradition has maintained in the course of approximately 2000 years. Turning to a consideration of the traditional definitions of the term Dhamma, one notes that the most complete work in a Western language dealing with the meaning of the term in the Pali canonical literature from a philological perspective is the impressive work by Magdalene and Wilhelm Giger, Pali Dhamma, Vornehemlich in der kanonischen Literatur. Professor and Mrs. Giger noted some Pali commentaries available at the time of the research, and on the basis of comments recorded at DA point 1.99.1 FF dot comma DHSA dot 38.23 comma and DHA dot 1 I dot point 22 new edition at page 18 on DHP verses 1 structured 5 traditional meanings of the term. First, guna, second, desana, third, hetu, fourth, pariyati, 5, nisatta or nisita. The judges remarked that these 5 categories encompass the principal meanings of the Dhamma. Being careful researchers, this husband and wife team did not overlook Adisu, locative plural form of Adi, that is, etc., and so forth, a very important part of the commentarial discussion, and share with the commentarial tradition on awareness that the 5 general categories did not exhaust the meaning and certain nuances of the term. In the course of their thorough work, more than 50 German terms as translations of the one Pali word Dhamma were suggested. In 1923, approximately 3 years after the Jeger's Pali Dhamma had appeared, the fourth fascicle of the Pali Text Society's dictionary became available. In their entry under Dhamma, T.W. Rice Davids and William Stead referred the reader to the study by Professor and Mrs. Jeger and noted, the exhaustive monograph reached the editors too late to be made use for the dictionary. Rice, Davids, and Stead referred to 3 passages in the commentaries, as had the Jegers, and similarly provided their readers with over 50 English terms, concepts for the one Pali term Dhamma. The 2 admirable sources, drawing from 3 Pali commentaries, provided the reader with 5 basic definitions. With Adi, one might suggest 6 definitions of the term Dhamma. From the commentary on the Digha Nikaya, 4 definitions were recorded. This text mentions the word Dhamma occurs with regard to qualify guna, meaning quality in the sense of virtuous moral quality. Second, teaching, desana, authoritative teaching. Then, pariyati conveys the meaning of that to be mastered, learned by heart, that without a living being, nisita, and so forth. As an example of Dhamma's meaning, guna, the DA notes a verse drawn from the Theraghata. By no means are Dhamma and Adhamma of equal recompense. Adhamma leads to hell, Dhamma causes the attainment of a good born. To illustrate Dhamma as Desana, this commentary gives the opening phrase of a popular passage characterizing Dhamma. O bhikshus, I will teach you the Dhamma, which is admirable in its beginning, and so forth. The commentary mentions a frequent refrain as an example of Dhamma's meaning, pariyati. Now then, a bhikkhu masters Dhamma, that is sutta, the discourses heard from the mouth of the Buddha and passed down orally. Gaya, sections to be chanted, and so forth. For Nisita, the commentary states, in the connection there are dhammas, there are aggregates, that is, khandhas, and so forth. The Atha Salini, a commentary on the Dhamma Sangani, also lists 4 meanings of Dhamma. It differs from DA in that it substitutes hetu, that is cause, for desana, that is teaching, and adds the term nijivata, that is lifelessness, to nisata. This commentary considers Dhamma to mean hetu in the passage. Analysis of Dhamma is knowledge with regard to cause, that is hetu. The commentary on the Dhammapada of DHA follows closely the presentation of DA and incorporates the term nijiva, using it as a synonym for nisita. The Sinhalese glossary on DHA, Dhampiya Atova Gatapadaya of DAG at page 15 in elaborating the DHA representation regarding Nisita, Nijava says there are dhammas means there are only dhammas because they are void in nature of self and that belonging to a self. The commentary on the Majjhima Nikaya, that is MA, gives a more comprehensive definition of Dhamma that noted by the Jijos and the PTSD. Now, this word Dhamma appears as an authoritative teaching that is Pariyati, truths that is Saka, rapt concentration that is Samadhi, wisdom that is Panna, natural condition is Pakati, inherent nature is Swabhava, voidiness is Sunnata, merit is Punna, Vinaya is violation, that is an offense committed within Sangha is Apati, that to be known Nyaya, and so forth is Adi. To illustrate Dhamma as truths, M.A. notes Ditha Dhammo, Viditha Dhammo, one has seen who has seen Dhamma, who has known Dhamma. Interesting is the interpretation of Dhamma as Samadhi. M.A. quotes briefly from D.11.8 or D.1154, a passage enumerating characteristics of the Bhagavans. They were of such names, such lineages, such morals, that is Ivam Sita, such Dhammas, that is Ivam Dhamma, such wisdom, that is Ivan Panna. The triad Sila Samadhi, Sita Samadhi Panna is often found in Pali literature and serves to hold together aspects of religious life. However, Dhamma in both singular and plural forms is found apparently in the place of Samadhi. M.A. notes that Dhamma so used has to do with Samadhi and the commentarial tradition appears to be consistent. Quoting from the Jataka, M.A. notes a passage in which Dhamma is to be understood as wisdom. For whom there are these four Dhammas, O Lord of monkeys, as in your case, truth, Dhamma, that is Panna, wisdom, courage, liberality. He overcomes the visible world. Dhamma also means natural condition or natural state, that is Prakriti. The subtle nuances between Prakriti and Swabhava, that is inherent nature, seem not of importance in interpreting one dimension of Dhamma. MA.I.17 quotes M.1 that having a Dhamma birth and glosses it with Prakriti. However, the same commentary MA.II.170 notes regarding Jati Dhamma at M.I.161 till 162. Jati Dhammo T Jnana Sabhava. Jnana Sabhava, that having as Dhamma birth means that having the inherent nature of arising. Dhamma in such places as Kusata Dhamma, that is wholesome Dhammas, is used in the sense of Sabhava, that is inherent nature. According to MA.I.17, Dhamma means Sunnata, that is voidness. When it is said, now, in this case, there are Dhammas. Dhamma is used in the sense of meritorious behavior, that is Punna. When it is said, Dhamma well lived brings ease. In the phrase two undetermined dhammas, dhamma is noted as apati, vinaya violation or offense within the sangha. Dhamma also is used to designate that to be known, that is nyaya, and when used in plural might be translated knowables. To illustrate this meaning, the MA notes all dhammas come into focus by every means in the face of the knowledge of the Buddha, the Bhagwan. The commentary on the Buddha Vamsa follows the definitions listed in MA with only one alteration. Whereas in MA, truths is the second definition, Bu A places it last and is more explicit in stating Katu Sakka Dhamma, Katu Sakka Dhammo, that is Dhamma that pertains to the Four Noble Truths. The Dharma Pradipika, a Sinhalese text written as a commentary on the Pali Mahabodhivamsa and dated from about AD 1200, provides 12 definitions for the word Dhamma, taking as an example passages where Ditha Dhamma, Patta Dhamma occur. The author defines Dhamma as the paths, fruits, and nirvana. Another definition, not thus far noted, is Vyavahara, that which is customary, proper. A noteworthy variation on the meaning of Dhamma in a particular passage in the canon is given in the DHPR. A canonical passage speaks of the Bhagavans as being characterized by such morals, that is Ivam Sita, and Dhammas, that is Ivam Dhamma, such wisdom, that is Ivam Panna. The Pali commentarial tradition interprets Dhamma here in the plural as having to do with Samadhi. However, DHPR takes Dhammas in such passages as referring to the nature of the Bhagavans. In presenting the remainder of the definitions, the DHPR differs insignificantly from what has already been noted. Another list of definitions of Dhamma is given concisely in the Abhidhana Papadikapaka, a Pali dictionary that probably preceded the DHPR by a few years. Two more sources, both in Sinhalese, may be noted and in the definitions given in order to bring the survey of the definitions up to relatively recent times. One source, the Abhidhanna Padikasaku, that is Abhidhanna Padi Pikasuki, was written by W. Subhuti nearly 90 years ago. It is a work explaining more fully the definitions given in the Abhidhanna Padipika. The second source is the admirable Sinhalese dictionary, Sri Sumangala Sabdakosha, compiled by the learned Veli Vitiye Surata approximately 20 years ago. The Abhidhana Padipika gives the compound Sakka as a definition of Dhamma, and Subhuti takes Sakka in the compound as truth. In this Abhidhana Padika Pikasuki, Subhuti defines Dhamma in terms of truth in the singular, that is, Dhamma occurs in the sense of truth. In such passages as one having seen Dhamma, having attained Dhamma. The commentary on the Majjhima Nikaya, that is MA, speaks of truths in its listed definitions, and the commentary on the Buddha Vamsa speaks of Dhamma, that is the four truths, or Dhamma that pertains to the four noble truths. Some Sinhalese sources had incorporated nirvana into their translation of the phrase. Subhuti adds several synonyms to our expanding list of definitions of Dhamma: constitution, that is constitution; quality, that is vikara; condition, that is pakkaya; that which has arisen unconditionally is pakka yupana; object is vishaya, and custom is yukti, and as separate term nibbana. These additions to the list of meanings Subhuti mentions fall into the category of Adi, that is, etc., noted in the Abhidhanna Padipika. Surata, in his Sinhalese dictionary, gives additional terms in his list of definitions the noble path, that is Arya Marga, the texts that are the three Pitakas, that is three, three Pitaka Palya, good conduct is Sukari, Sukaritya, and that which was spoken by the Buddha is Buddha Bhasatya. In concluding this survey, I will list the definitions of the term Dhamma given in the Pali and Sinhalese Theravada Buddhist sources consulted, which have been given different code numbers of sources consulted. Source DA is 1, DHS is 2, DHA is 3, MA is 4, BUA is 5, Abhi ABHIDHP is 6, DHPR is 7, ABHIDHPS is 8, SSK is 9. Buddha Bhasita means that which was spoken by the Buddha. Guna means quality in the sense of virtuous moral quality. Buddha Bhasita, which means that which was spoken by Buddha, has been derived from source 9. Guna, that is quality in the sense of virtuous or moral quality, from the sources 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9. Desana, that is teaching from 1, 3, and 7. Pariyati, that is authoritative teaching texts from 1 to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Nisata, which means that without a living being from 1, 3, 6, 7, and 8. Nisata Nijavata means that without a living being, that is lifelessness, from 2, 8, and 9. Sunnata, that is emptiness, voidness, from sources 4, 5, 9. Hetu means cause, from 2 and 9. Sakani, which means truth, from 4, 6. Katu Sakka Dhamma, that is Dhamma that pertains to the four noble truths, from 5. Sakka, that is truth, from 6, 8, and 9. Samadhi, rapt concentration, from 4, 5, 6, 8, and 9. Panna, wisdom, from 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Pakati, natural condition, from 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Swabhava, inherent nature, from 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Puna, merit, from 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Apati, and offense committed within the Sangha, from 4, 5, 6, 8, and 9. Nyaya, that to be known, from 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Adi, etc. That is, the scope of meaning of the term is not exhausted by the definitions listed, from 1 to 4, 5, 6, and 8. Nyaya, proper manner or propriety, from 6, 8, and 9. Akara, that is proper conduct, from 6, 8, and 9. Karana, that is reason, cause, from 6, 8, and 9. Magha Falani Maga Maga Falani Vina, that is paths, fruits, and Nibbana, from 7. Arya Marga, that is Arya Marga, noble path, from 9. Vyavahara, that which is customary, 7. Kusala Dhamma, Kusal Dhamma, that is Dhamma that pertains to what is wholesome, from 7 and 9. Vikara, that is constitutional quality or quality, from 8. Pakaya, that is condition, that is 8. Pakaya Samupanna, that which has arisen conditionally, from 8. Vishaya, that is object, from 8 and 9. Yuti, that is custom and fitness, from 8 and 9. Nibbana, from 9. Tripitaka Pali, the texts that are three Pitakas, from 9. Sukarita, that is good behavior, good conduct, from 9.
And Political Thought, Chapter 4, Rectitude and Rehabilitation in the Spirit of Hindu Law. Page number 128. Punishment is a practical tool for bringing law into the world. Theologically, but also theoretically, Dhamma enters the world through the Veda and the unbroken transmission of its Dharma down to the present in the learned tradition. However, by an indirect theological route, Dharma enters the world of practice through the punishments of a ruler. The importance of the ruler thus extends well
beyond responsibilities for the legal procedures discussed in Chapter 5. In fact, there is a little doubt that Hindu law viewed protection of the people and the promotion of the system of caste and life stages as a rural main duties. Punishment is the root and the mean of such protection and promotions. The elaboration and specification of punishment for specific crimes is extraordinarily detailed in the Hindu legal texts. To, to examine the spirit of the Hindu legal view of punishment, however, we must first examine the general description and the theories of punishment presented in the text. The relationship of the general theories to the system of dharma and to political ideas will then reveal a view of punishment that supports both religions and political ends. Rather than focusing on the effects of punishment only at the level of the state, however, we will also examine its role in the system of castes and life stages. Of all the usual elements of laws, punishment is the one that connects most obviously to what a legal system can do to us. But the Hindu tradition emphasizes the fact that the punishment does a great deal for us as well. Punishment functions as a necessary complement of all other elements of laws. Crime, punishment, and rectitude. Danda is a crucial to the scheme of dharma presented in Hindu laws. In the first place, punishment is like legal procedure on the special responsibilities of the ruler. Page number 129. Beyond this, however, Danda is the check on all transgressions or violations of dharma by any person. Hindu jurisprudence often personifies punishment as a deity. The following passage from the Laws of Manu highlights the central importance of the punishment both for the king's personal dharma and for the wider system of caste and life stages. For the king's sake, the Lord formally created punishment, his son, the law and the protector of all beings, made from the energy of Brahman. It is the fear of him that makes all beings, both the mobile and immobile, exceed to bring, use, and to not deviate from the law proper to them. Punishment is the king, he is the male, he is the leader, he is the ruler, and traditional tell us he stands as a surety for the law with respect to the four orders of life. Punishment disciplines all the subject. Punishment alone protects them, and punishment watches over them as they sleep. Punishment is the law, the wise declare. This poetic identification of danda and dharma in these verses express well the overarching view of punishment in the spirit of Hindu laws. It is bound to and identified with the ruler and, more importantly, guarantees the flourishing of the caste and the life stages. Punishment imposes a discipline that ensures the movement of social world towards the theologically defined ends of Hindu law. This grand vision, however, is supplemented with very detailed studies of the nuances of crime and punishment. The most thought digest of Dharma Shastra view of punishment is the 16th century discrimination about punishment of Dhamman. which serves as the primary basis of the following description of crime and punishment in Hindu law. Punishment in criminal cases is classified under six headings. First, murder; second, theft; third, rape; fourth, slander; fifth, assault; and sixth, lasciviousness. Vardhamana Vardhamana distinguishes criminal and civil punishment and justifies his focus on the former. All kind of civil disputes originated either for greed or for ignorance, and so either of the parties must be guilty of false assertion of right or concealment of facts, for which offence they become liable to punishment in civil cases also. Page number 130. That is right, but this works is not all concerned with such punishments following incidentally for civil disputes. The present terrorist is however concerned with crimes proper, which are those that are reported to the king by spies and in which offenders are hauled up before courts of justice by the king's men and then tried, not from any private complaint. This statement connects punishment proper, that is danda, to crime proper, that is those cases that are brought before the ruler through the policing efforts of his functionaries. Other punishment, especially pecuniary or other assault related fines resulting from civil litigations and break off as emerging from the legal procedure itself and thus not directly part of the ruler's dharma to punish. The distinction is important for understanding the spirit of punishment in Hindu law. Punish- Punishment is intended for violence of the laws of caste and life stages, both social and private. Punishment only indirectly or incidentally related to civil infraction classified under most of the 18 titles of laws that cover private disputes. A judicial decision to compensate a loss or transfer property back to an owner or reallocate inheritance is not classified as punishment proper when implemented. Rather, civil litigations and its attendant wealth transfers are more likely assisted self-help, a legal form of personal prosecuting a claim that is guaranteed by a ruler in its main sense. Therefore, danda pertains to crime and to sin, but not to civil wrongs, whether contextual or touristic or tortious. The form of danda are traditionally divided into four categories: first, warning; second, censure; third, fine; and fourth, corporal punishment. These four categories are in turn subdivided into more specific forms. For example, fixed and variable fines for the 10-14 places on the body where physical punishment may be inflicted. Very typically of Dharma Shastra, therefore, the traditional creates a branching tree of categorization and subcategorization that progressively enumerates both the legal causes and the forms of punishment. This scholastic practice of listening continues further to the enumeration of factors affecting the type of level of punishment to be administered. Vardhmana listed the following 11 categories of circumstantial factors affecting the determination and administration of punishment: the caste, the thing, the quantity, the utility, the person concerning whom the offense was being committed, the age, power, qualifications, the place, the time, and the specific offense are the several factors. The meting out of punishment is famously constrained in Hindu law by the plethora of factors impending to the determination of proper punishment for specific cases. Through all legal system acknowledge mitigating circumstances in the fixing of punishment, Hindu jurisprudence assumes from the outset that every case is specific and therefore that the textually stated punishment for various crimes are always affected by intervening circumstances of the case and hand. In other words, there is no sense of automatically applied punishments for certain crimes in which the crime itself fixes or predetermines the appropriate punishment regardless of the circumstances. Vardhmana's very long decision of the factors affecting punishment signals the profound importance of a realized approach to penal law in Hindu jurisprudence. A few examples will provided the guest of such factors. Certain people are categorized exempt from capital punishment, principally various kinds of Brahmins, but sometimes ruler as well. The punishment for illicit sex with a woman who willing consents in half the time for rape. Only corporal, not pecuniary punishment should be administered to persons of law or untouchable castes. Traders and artisans should not be punished by confiscating the tools of their trade, since this promotes intolerable poverty and leads to anger, resentment, and more criminal activities. Recidivist criminals should be punished more harshly than first time offenders. Corporal punishment can be commuted to fines in the case of Brahman offenders, persons of good family, or those who diligently perform religious rites. Page number 132. Despite the clear preference of extensive, if not exhaustive, enumeration as the best method of communicating the penal law, Dharma Shastra texts also rank the severity of legal infractions. The most heinous of all crimes is called Sahasha, usually translated as violence, but as Rosher has shown, also intimately connect with and sometimes coexistive with steya, theft, aggravated theft, or robbery committed against the owner is the paradigmatic crime in Hindu jurisprudence. The title of law dealing with robbery is had to be more serious than the other three titles dealing with the crime proper, which are in turn more serious than the remaining 14 titles dealing with the civil infractions. The four standard title of Hindu criminal law would seem to be insufficient to cover all the possible criminal actions that might be perpetrated. Dharma Shastra commenters therefore, made deft use of a title of Hindu law found in most texts and known constantly as miscellaneous. Full stop. This title points to practical working of criminal and penal law that remain unspecified and little analyzed in other sections of Dharma Shastra. Full stop. As we have seen, it is a well known rule of Dharma Shastra that neither the king nor any official shall initiated a lawsuit independently, full stop, under the miscellaneous title. However, we find reference to many instances in which a ruler may himself initiated a legal procedure, because they are literally dependent on the ruler. Such instances includes violation of his edicts, the performance of his work, granting villages, the disposition of constituents of his kingdom. Interestingly, they also include deviations from their duties by heretics, adherents of the Veda, guilds, and corporations. In other words, Dharma Shastra texts grant the ruler and the right to initiate investigations and to administrate punishment of certain kinds of criminal offences. As usual, the text enumerates exactly which category of crime may be prosecuted through the ruler's own initiative. The title of miscellaneous induce disputes connected with the king, violations of his edicts, the performance of his work, granting villagers, the disposition of the constituents of kingdom, deviation from the duties by heretics, adherents of the Veda, guides, and corporation disputes between father and son, violations and penances, the suspension of donation, the anger of monks, the sign of mixing castes, restrictions on their livelihood, and whether has not been covered thus far. All this is not found under miscellaneous. Full stop. Obviously, crime in violation of the ruler's decreases or against other formal action of the state may be prosecuted by the ruler without outside promoting, because the ruler himself is in some sense of aggrieved party. Also, interestingly, however, is the meta structure of legal administration that the ruler provides to corporate groups of various kinds when their respective efforts to promulgate and enforce their group laws within the group fail, the ruler is called upon the intervenes and rectify the violation through his own punishment. Through his purposefully open-ended title of laws, Dharmashastra author and the commenters were able to find an expandable and fixable traditional categories under which to concern a host of penal and criminal laws, especially those relating to the ruler and brought into the Dharmashastra scholastic traditions from the parallel to largely usurped, tradition of Arthashastra, the science of statecraft, full stop. This title, in addition to the other criminal titles, gave the Hindu law tradition an excellent framework of defining both crime and punishment and considerable details. Full stop. The details, of course, several the larger vision alluded to in the opening quotation from menu in this section, but they are asserted to a truly sophisticated jurisprudential tradition in this area. This wider functions of punishment in Hindu laws, however, still remains to be discussed. The deterrence and education of both sin and crime. Punishment in Hindu law actually takes two forms, danda and prayashita. Both are important to the spirit of Hindu law. The first, danda, refer to the punishment meted out by legal authorities, usually a ruler, for criminal and civil offences. The second, prayashita, denotes the self-imposed penances and expiations that are generally undertaken voluntarily by a person who has committed a legal or religious transaction transgression. Full stop. A third, more famous concept, that of karma, is very often lumped together with other forms of Hindu punishment, but karma is in a special sense of unimportant in Hindu law. Before considering danda and prayashita, I must explain how and why I think karma is unimportant. Page number 134. The most widely cited study of punishment in Hindu law argues that the higher principle of retribution unifies a diversity of punishment schemes in early Indian texts. More specifically, punishment are retribution of acts rather than of persons full stop, with retribution of acts at the at the center, full stop, appears prominently as well. Full stop. The idea of a cosmic moral caution, the preconditions human life and determines the bodily form of the eternal soul, is the most widely known idea from ancient India, and one shared by almost all ancient Indian system of thought. Full stop. Action have consequences. Full stop. Pleasurable pleasurable result and rewards, and painful result are punishment. Dharmashastra confirmed this idea in no uncertain terms. Action produce good and bad result and originate from the mind, speech and the body. Action produces the human condition, the highest, the mind link and the lowest. The study of karma's effects, however, focuses surely on bad action and is considered an ancillary subject to the larger question of penance. The 14th century commentator Madhava explained that the consequences of bad karma affect three aspects of life, namely birth, health, and happiness. The objective straw man interrupts as follows. The consequences of actions can be neither enjoined nor prohibited because one can neither put them into practice nor prevent them. Therefore, a discussion of this topic is improper in this text because it is a treatise that puts injunction and prohibitions first. The interlocutor relies here on the Mimsa traditions claims that the Dharma concerns only positive and negative rules of action. Madhava's response to this argument invokes in turn two other principles of Mimsa to justify the decision but also to place it in proper perspective. This is not a flaw because the usefulness of discussion derives from the fact that it is praise and explanation with respect to penance and praise of explanation shares it in the singularity with regard to both injunction or prohibition because it respectively promotes what is enjoined. Page number 135 and turns people away from what is prohibited. This is the rule among those who know the tradition. Madhava accepts the objector's premises that the consequences of karma have no direct connection to positive or negative rule, but he has also made use to the mimesa category to praise and explanation to assert an importance but secondary link between the discussion of karma and the main thrust of dharma rules. That link is the final unity of expression between any given injunction or prohibition and the supportive praises, discouragements, and or explanation that might relate to one of these. Again, this is a Mimesa principle called Eklavyata, in which all textual statements are understood to express one and only one idea, namely, to command it or to prohibit it, a specific action. Other ancillary statements, including those in the category of praise and explanation, have value and relevance only in connection to and in support of some singular commanded or prohibition. Madhava's statement places bad karma consequences, that is, the effects or result of adharma, and the theological margins of dharma. As praise and explanation, the consequences of bad karma are not something a person can do anything about. As a result, considerations of bad karma and its effect cannot form part of all important question of dharma and law. What is mandatory, comma, what is required of me as either an act or a resistant of dharma? Question mark. Karma's effect have an important supporting role to play in relation to dharma, especially penance, comma, but they are not structurally necessary to the systematic presentation of dharma in terms of caste and life stages. The horrible portents of bad karma are called in the inspiration for voluntary penance. The Dharma Shastra author do not discuss karma's consequences at all in connection with danda and only secondarily in connection with prayasita because the so-called punishments of karma lack a true agent. Karmic punishment occur impersonally, not through the action of an agent whose punishing actions might be page number 136 considered by dharma. The emphasis in both dharma and karma talk is on positive duty rather than negative consequences. The speculations about actions and their immediate and dialectically effects reaches incredible complexity in Indic traditions, comma, only a part of which is reflected in Dharma Shastra. Instead, comma, the Hindu law tradition tends to assume or accept much about karmas working without investigating or elaborating a clear theory of its own. As a result, we find many different elaborating a clear theory of its own. As a result, we find many different views of karma expressed in one and the same text. More often, we find that Dharma authors and commenters tended not to engage in karma speculations to the extent seen in other intelli- Indic intellectual traditions, being concerned simply to enumerate various systems of karma and rebirth with not much theoretical concentrations. Full stop. Notably, comma, the 16th century discrimination about punishment of Vardhamana lacks any substantive discussion of karma or karma theory. It has been too easy to connect karma and danda as something like cosmic and earthly punishment, comma, respectively. Within the main exposition of the law of caste and the life stages, however, karma is more presumed as a theoretical backdrop, remote trust that does not impinge much upon either the determination of the performance of dharma, as Hacker and others have reminded us. All dharma is karma. In other words, all lawful action is a part of action generally, comma, but the analysis of what is lawful and good must be distinguished from the analysis of the material and spiritual effects of keeping the law and doing good, comma, on their opposite. Finally, comma, if the central argument of this book is correct, karma vipaka does not fit into the center of Hindu law because it deals with an invisible process that is otherworldly, not ordinary. Full stop. It therefore does not fit into the scheme of law because its theological theology is directed toward supramundane process and substance. Full stop. It of course forms a backdrop for all human action but cannot become the central focus of Dharma Shastra because it lacks of focus and ordinary life. The karmic implications of ordinary acts are the subject of Dharma Shastra, namely that dharma equals law is positive karma while adharma equal negative karma and its consequences. In this way, the reaping of karma fits in only indirectly as a part of dharma. Page number 137. For these reasons of theological marginalization, ambiguity, 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 disinterest, and incongruity, I want to suggest the karma is journal and non-significant element in the spirit of Hindu law. Karma effects are the fine print in the dharma contract set forth in Dharma Shastra. The effects are given in some detail, but no one read them, and their purpose, in any case, is to present collectively a horrible imagined scenario for doing what is bad in order to encourage what is good. Instead, only good karma, another name of dharma, is really crucial to the tradition. As a result, we may leave karma behind and turn to the forms of the punishment that are important of Hindu law. More importantly, we may leave behind the idea of retribution in the only key to understanding the role of punishment in Hindu law. Retribution in the form of karma consequences takes care of itself. Punishment in Hindu jurisprudence is rather about prevention and deterrence. In the first place, a frequent reference in Dharma Shastra is the use of legal procedure and punishment by a ruler to check or thwart criminals. As the 16th century digest states, criminals are suppressed by carrying out legal procedure against them, and then criminals are suppressed. The law of caste and life stages is established, and only when that is established can people perform the duties enjoined by the law. The sequence here also links legal procedure and the normative practice as mutually constitutively. Instructions started simply, procedural and substantive law mutually reinforce on another. In terms of prevention and deterrence, a key link in this mutual relationship is a suppress criminal by bringing them before the law and punishing them. At the social level and from the perspective of the ruler or state, this preventive aspect of punishment predominates. At a personal level, by constraint, penance is the form of punishment that, according to the texts, deters further infractions or crimes. Penance corrects the offender's mindset and, if mandated as a public ceremony, can send a public message about the seriousness of the transgression. According to the commenter Vijnaneshwara, the enumeration of the masks such as consumption and other diseases is made in order to generate a sense of urgent fear in Brahman murders and the like, such that they become forced to penance. Page number 138. Both Danda and Prayashita are punishment. Danda is a form of punishment that is mandatory duty of a ruler, while Prayashita is a voluntary according to the contrition of the offender. Ultimately, however, worldly punishment and penance merge as in the following passage. When men who have committed sins and punished by the king, they go to heaven. Immaculate, like various men who have done good deeds. The commenter Kuluka affirms, in this way, what is started is the fact that, like penance, punishment too cause the destruction of sin. Together, they work initially to establish a baseline of social order and personal restraint that allows the law of caste and life stages to flourish. That order is premised on the deterrent effect of those imposes and voluntary punishment. Such deterrence negatively attempts to prevent or restrain criminal action at both a social and personal level. Through this view of punishment as a negative reaction or normative transgression is significant within Hindu jurisprudence, it can also mislead us about the more prominent positive presentation of punishment in the Dharma texts. A negative cast on punishment tends to misrepresent the way in which Hindu legal punishment serve to support and in fact make possible the functioning of the system of castes and the life stages. In other words, punishment have a positive character and purpose complements the preventive or deterrent effect it may have, overshadowing and retributive function. Punishment in Hindu law thus emphasizes rectitude and deterrence over retribution. In fact, punishment in Hindu view is what makes law possible at all, a point which we must now examine in more detail. As law's vehicle, punishment contains a recognition of human imperfection and fallibility. Law in its fullest sense can only exist in the world if punishment is there to reduce the inevitable falling of human beings, their unavoidable deviation from an ideal path of perfection. Without punishment, law remains an elusive ideal to which no one can aspire. With punishment, comma, law became the training ground for a whole variety of religiously aimed actions. Full stop. Page number 139. Punishment simultaneously guarantee the overall stability of the system and enables transgressors to be readmitted into it. The year 1921 saw the publication of two rather different studies of the relationship of punishment or violence and law. Both investigate how the creation of the law of the state requires punishment, especially in the form of state violence. The first study, Benjamin's criticism of violence, is well known for its provocative thesis about the possibility of non instrumental political means to achieve a functioning social order without the law of state. The second is the little known essay by Sarkar, The Hindu Theory of the State, which advances an apologetic account of Hindu statecraft by arguing that behind the two pillars of the state, property and law, lies punishment. Benjamin's essay is famously complex, would some would say opaque, but he states the argument most relevant to this discussion as follows: all violence as a mean is either lawmaking or law preserving, full stop. If it lays claim to neither of these predicates, it forfeits all validity. It follows, however, that all violence as a mean, even in the most favorable case, is implicated in the problematic nature of law. Full stop. Further, he writes, law making is a power making, and to that extent an immediate manifestation of violence. Benjamin uses his critique of the seemingly inevitable connection of law and violence to sketch out a program of revolution achieved through non-violent, non-instrumental means that would shatter what he sees as the pernicious mythology of violence that keep laws in place in the world. Throughout, Benjamin's focus is violence, not punishment, but his word choice purposefully provokes a reorientation towards the state action against individuals by selecting a different team. Nevertheless, he very often means punishment even though he considered other forms of state violence that would not qualify as punishment, for example, military and some police violence. The profundity of Benjamin's claim that law depends upon violence for its existence is, from one perspective, difficult to fathom, because it appears to reduce law to so many manifestations of violence for legal ends. Full stop. This leaves little place for law to serve any other purpose. Indeed, Benjamin seems quite prepared to discuss law as social institution altogether, for the coming age is not so unimaginably remote that an attack of law is altogether futile. Full stop. Page number 140. Ignoring the importance and explanatory context of post World War I Europe, in which Benjamin wrote, what remains clear from this essay is the power of violence to create law and to preserve it. Full stop. We need to follow Benjamin into the nettlesome critique of the ideology of law in order to profit from his insightful reflection on law's great dependence on violence and punishment. Still, Benjamin's conclusion is obviously a negative one. The intimated, perhaps inextricable, relation of law and violence necessitates a reflection, a rejection of law and violence in favor of a wholly different, revolutionary program of social auditing. By contrast, Sarkar, while also finding a deep and necessary connection between law and violent punishment in Hindu jurisprudence, argues the positive case that law's essentially educative function depends upon the existence of a ruler's punishment. Sarkar's focus is not law and violence as such, but rather a larger overview of Hindu statecraft, full stop, through his remarks on the narrower point and accordingly not as extensive as Benjamin's, his central point mirrors Benjamin's in important ways. Two inseparable accidents of Hindu theory of the state are first the doctrine of mamatva and svatva, that is, one's ownness, proprium or property, and secondly, the doctrine of dharma, that is, law, justice, and duty, and behind them both lies the doctrine of danda bracket punishment and sanctions bracket close. Herein is to be sought the nucleus of the whole Hindu philosophy of sovereignty. A state is a state because it can coerce, restraint, compel, full stop, eliminate control or the coercive element from social life, and the state as an entity vanishes. Full stop. Danda is the very essence of the statal relations. No danda, no state. A danda-less, that is, sanctionless state is a contradiction in terms. Sarkar summarized these in outline. First, no danda, no state. Second, A. No state, no dharma. B. No state, no property. He then proceeds to discuss the prevalent image of punishment in Hindu texts as a creating the orderly wood by destroying the rule of anarchy, or in Sanskrit parlance, the logic of the fishes, Matsya Nyaya. Matsya Nyaya. At the heart of punishment's efficacy is fear. According to Sarkar, and its effect in deterrence. Full stop. In this respect, the Hindu view converges well with classic European formulations of the origin of an right to punish. Beccaриa's 1764 treatise, for example, contends that punishment originates in the despotic spirit of every man and the universe principle of anarchy, and that is right to punish, therefore protect the law from the private usurpation of each individual. As a consequence, law's purpose is nothing other than to prevent the offender from doing fresh harm to his fellows and to deter others from doing likewise. In addition to fear, however, Sarkar interprets clear reference to the educative function of punishment. In fact, he concludes his essay by claiming, in accordance with the doctrine of Danda, then, the state of convenience, the state is conceived as a pedagogic institution or moral laboratory, so to speak. It is an organization in thought which men's natural vices are purged, and it thereby becomes an effective means to the general uplifting of mankind. Benjamin would no doubt scoff at Sarkar's positive characterization of punishment as the work of Pollyanna. After all, if the texts are any indication, real people in classic and medieval India must have been executed, banished, beaten, and mutilated in the names of the law and restrictions to the moral laboratory of the state as a teacher of virtuous seem to soften and excuse the cold realities of punishment. However, instead of talking side in the depth debate over whether law's connection to violence and punishment should be judged positively or negatively, I want to look further into some of the Hindu views of punishment in order to find perhaps a way to, if not reconciling the two views, at least making use of the insights of both. To do this, we should examine one of the Rocher's important points in his study of Hindu criminal law. His survey of Dharma Shastra revealed that the term sahasa, violence generally, or robbery specifically, is often a cover term of short for the whole gamut of crimes. Moreover, assert sahasa is not only more serious than all of them, but the fact that it is dangerous to the law and order is one of the fundamental characteristics ascribed to it. Page number 142. The later part of this assertion echoes a key point made by Benjamin that law sees violence in the hand of individual as a danger undermining the legal system. The general violence of criminal activity in Hindu jurisprudence is thus similarly seen as the most insidious threat to the order of law. The main problem with violence, then, is less the injury it causes to some person or group than the threat it poses to the state or other legal authorities. For Benjamin, this is still the view from the world of law and thus of an ideology of inevitable violence. Nevertheless, Rocher's observation confirms the fact the Hindu scholists too worries about the dangers of non-legalized violence and, like legal thinkers almost everywhere, postulated legal punishment as the only legitimate response. Benjamin himself begins to suggest a way out of the purely negative characterization of law dependence on violence when he asserts the necessity of seeking the reason for the commandment against immortal action no longer in what the deed does to the victim but in what does of God and the doer. For Benjamin, law and its violence must be eliminated in order to increase the physical torment of the legally condemned, but immoral action must still be condemned instead by a theoretical and institutional focus on the negative consequences of that action for the individual and for gods as an historical transcendent entity. The shift of focus and punishment purpose away from protecting or avenging the victim towards convicting the perpetrator psychologically, the morally would at first seem to be little more and than rehabilitation. Here, Benjamin seems implicitly to deny what the Hindu tradition would assert that self-imposed penance and correction is also a form of punishment and violence through surely outside the realm of legal means of Benjamin's terms. At this point, the Hindu law tradition offers a metaphor of law already invoked several times in the work that allow us to see a positive aspect to punishment that neither denies its often ugly connection to violence nor sees it as a state glorious instrument of ethical formation. Punishment, like all other elements of Hindu law, as part of ritual of dharma in ordinary life, say a family punishment, serves all of the purpose already described. It balances inequality through retribution. It instills fear and deters future transgressions. It rehabilitates transgressors and permits them to re-enter the social order in good standing, it indicates individual about how to be and to know in society. Through all of this, however, punishment also make the overarching ritual of society effective and productive of its final goals. Full stop. Page number 143. When those goals are defined through theological reflection on the process of ordinary life, comma, as they are Hindu jurisprudence, the working of punishment simultaneously establish and support a legal regime modeled on ritual when the ritual context is not the family, comma, but society, comma, more specifically the theologically constructed social order of caste and life stages. The ritual became coexistent with life itself. For anyone who is a part of that legal world, at this level, punishment is a vehicle of law. That means by which laws process dynamically affect people's lives in the rhetorical world created by these ideas of law as a ritual is an implicated promise that both along the way and the end of law's journey through a person's life, ritual benefits will occur. Punishment and penance correct ritual mistake and made by the individual that threaten to make him or her of the proverbial path of righteousness. Punishment and penance are the steering wheels guidance one thought the ritual of law. So yes, they are rehabilitative, but more importantly, they are ritually effective. To make it to the end of law's ritual and to achieve its benefit, one has to make mistake and experience punishments. Missteps, and outright wrongs are inevitable, but the only thing worse than a wrong is an unpunished wrong. Uncorrected ritual errors, mistaken or intentional, undermine the efficacy of the whole procedure. At this level of correction, punishment, and penance do suffer from any unsustainable distancing punishment and penance from harsh practical realities, comma, but there are two justification for the abstraction. First, comma, both punishment or penance exist on a continuum from severe and violent to mild and non-violent. Second, comma, whether severe or mild punishment, ready to Benjamin's claim that the expiatory power of violence is not visible to man, can at least in the Hindu view, comma, spite mistakes and wrong in such a way that the ritual of law can proceed effectively. Life in the world of legal rituals consists of a legal ritual comprised primarily of obedient law abiding action and secondarily of mistaken, comma, evil law threatening action. The law of Manu captured this essential combination well. If he acts righteously for the most part and unrighteously to a small degree, enveloped in those very element he enjoys happiness in heaven. Thus, for Manu, the ambitious but still beautiful technological end of the ritual of law elevates punishment from being a mean to a deadly political end to being also a means to accomplish the flourishing of society itself.
Political Thought, Chapter number 5, Theory of Punishment in Ancient India by Radhakrishnan Chaudhary, M.A., Ganesh Datta College, Begusarai, Bihar. Page number 166. Manu has rightly pointed out in a nutshell the ancient Indian theory of punishment in the following words. Punishments have been prescribed by the Sikhs, so that righteousness may not be outraged and unrighteousness may be cured. In ancient India, law was based on the twin conception of theology and agreement, and as such, it is clear that even in matters of punishment and justice, the theology had its way. General conception about punishment was that it should help the man or the criminal to reform himself according to the prescribed codes of dharma. This does not mean that punishment was merely religious to terrify the people. Punishment was meted out with accuracy, and those who violated the king's peace or justice were heavily punished. After being duly examined by the court, punishment signifies danda. The administration of justice presupposes the existence of an authority, even organization, social or political, must have some authority without which the human society can't function. Full stop. The principle of the authority is an eternal support of the human society. Danda is the important aspect. The state must have some coercive power, and viewed in this light, we can see that danda is coercive power of the state. The term Dand Niti was first adopted by Usanya, and the book Dand Niti, ascribed to Prajapati, is mentioned in Mahabharata. Prajapati is regarded as the creator of Danda. Danda was created by God Shiva after long concentration, and even the science of polities was made out of Danda. Sometimes Danda is identified with Dharma, and it is said that Danda is the soul of a Dharma and it's Dharma itself. The whole universe is under Danda. Thus, we find that the theory of punishment of Danda was basically theological and metaphysical, and an attempt was always made to develop its abstract side in its eternity. Through we find that a realistic approach to law was given in the Vedic period, its practical side was fully ignored in the later period. The principle of danda is omnipotent. One particular reason behind the religious color of danda is that religious gives danda the authority of or sanctions. The Hindu conception of sanction corresponds closely to the modern concept of sovereignty. Sovereignty. Speaking about the authority of Danda, Manu observes the whole world is rectified by Danda, and even the gods and demigods are subject to its authority. Manu identified Danda with Dharma, and it is through the sanction of Dharma that all men enjoy the world, straying away from Swadharma, Danda is the authority which represents the state's will, and as such it has got not only a legal preeminence but also a moral preeminence. It is the fountain of social peace. It is with the development of society that the idea of punishment also developed. Society was organized on some fundamental principle. In order to stabilize the society, it was through proper to vest some authority in the state. The state was armed with the power of coerce, restrain, and punish according to the needs. But in doing so, the state was in duty bound to take the note of dharma and to accordingly. Hence, the practice was always guided by the theory. Danda was the guarantee of universal happiness and righteousness. By avoiding danda, it was thought that it was designed to correct the human vices. The epic conception was the danda had two functions: it protects and governs. Page number 168. Manu holds the same view about danda. Danda saves dharma, comma. Ethical interpretation of the term leads to believe that danda acted as a guide for all and helped man in choosing between right and wrong. Dharma was really well applied danda, for it paved the way for sound morality. Danda is great luster. It cannot be held by despots. It strikes down the king who swerves the law. Only a king who is honest could wield danda. Danda is also identified with administration. According to Manu, danda was vested in the amatya. If we identify the term danda with administration, we will have to accept that there was an officer to execute danda into practice. That officer know that danda nayak, or the minister in charge of the administration. Danda is derived from the term dama, to restrain, the means by which a person is restrained from misconduct is danda. Danda is the mean of purification, and the punishment awarded to the offender is for the purification of the state. Kautilya treats dand as an instrument for being people under control. In ancient India, dand was simple a part of fourfold policy of the state, that is sam dam dand bhed, bracket, reconciliation, gift, punishment and division. Dand is extolled and almost deified in Dharmashastra literature. Gautam treats Dand as reforming or correcting influence. King was only empowered to inflict earth and vad dand, bracket, fine and corporal punishment, bracket close. Some authorities hold the view that the right of inflicting punishment was the prerogative of the king, but a glance at the republican constitution of ancient India will dispel this notion. In the republican constitution, the Raja or the president alone had the right to convict the accused, but in doing so, he was to be guided by the Parini Pustaka, or the Book of Precedents. Thus, we find that the king honored the law of the land. The ancient India theory of punishment was based on the central idea of that punishment for a wrongdoing was to be meted out by the king for the preservation of social order. Dr. Sen holds the view that there is no ting of the theory of retribution or vengeance and point out that in the matter of punishment, the directives given by the Hindu legal expert compare favorably with the advanced system of today in taking into account not only the objective circumstances of the offense but also the subjective limitation of the offenders. The ruler in ancient Indian politics is called Dandadhar. Dand is considered as an essential attribute of royalty. The king regulates the state by wielding this weapon of Dand. Dand is supreme in royal dharma. Dand brings into the existence well regulated and well planned society, recognizing rights and duties and privileges and laws. Behind the philosophy of law and punishment lies the conviction, as held by Manu, the man is essentially low, vile and selfish, and can be kept on straight path only with difficulty and harshness. The view of Dr. Sen that there is no tinge of retribution does not hold good in the light of modern researches. Kaigi has rightly observed. The Hyman strongly proved how deeply the prominent mind in the people were persuaded that the eternal ordinances of the ruler of the world were as inevitable in mental and moral matters as in the realm of nature, and that every wrong act, even the unconsciousness, was punished and sin expiated. The Vedic conception was that it was a retribution from heaven. Expiation and done are spoken of as twin modes of purification. Retribution in the form of expiation was very common during the Vedic period. Expiation was a logical part of the system based on religion and metaphysical theory. The divine judgment was based on the belief that all guilt was punished by the god. The existence of the term Iradeya or Vergeld character was proves the payment of compensation. Retribution in its practical character was present in the Vedas. In Mahabharata also punishment was as retribution in visual in the following words: to take revenge on him who take revenge, to retaliate, when struck, and to do harm in return for harm. The punishment by oath and ordeal was also known. According to Jolly, the system of oath was prevalent even during the time of Rigveda. Jaiswal says that ordeal was only a form of oath. The system of ordeal is as old as Rigveda. According to Narad and Yagnvalkya, ordeal shall be resorted to only in default of worldly proofs. Full stop. Page number 170. When the right arguments fail, ordeal has to be used in the investigation of cases. Punishment for crime was inflicted by divine judgment or through the penance imposed by the priest. An amalgama penance was inflicted of earlier peristyle jurisprudence with later legal practice. Penance was inflicted by the king at the behest of priest. The philosophy behind this theory of expiation was that punishment purifies sin. The principle of purification is also advocated by the Purana. Another marked feature of Dand was the restraining principle. Gautam has opined that the creation of punishment was for checking the miscreant and wrongdoers. Kautilya and Shukra suggested the principal means of enabling the criminal soul. So far as stringency is concerned, Kautilya is no less, but his view was reformatory. His conception is that the crime is inherent in social makeup of a man and it spreads from person to person as a disease. He treats crime as a contaminating disease and suggests that the criminal must be reformed by finally, finally doing away with the criminal tendency in him. He says when the guilt is got rid of, comma, there will be no guilt persons, comma, but when only a guilty person is not rid of the guilty with will contaminated others. Kautilya wants to the extirpation of those who desire evil of the kingdom. He not only attached reformatory or retributive value of the punishment, but also he saw the germs of discipline in the punishment. He, his inner motive was to educate the people, and in this respect, he was in line with Aristotle, who viewed punishment as an educational discipline. Kautilya observes punishment, which alone can procure safety and security of life, depends on discipline. He, comma, like Vishnu, comma, holds the punishment must be proportionate to guilt. Shukra's idea was that punishment leads to abdication of bad practices and that the king should administrate punishment for the furtherance or morality and religion, and he regards punishment as the great stay of virtue. Page number 171. Kamandrika justify punishment for the purpose of justice. According to Yagnavalkya, punishment should place the subject in right path. Before awarding punishment, the following points are taken into consideration. First, motive. Second, circumstances. Third, capacity of the criminal. And fourth, the crime. Various types of punishment have been devised, such as A. Vadhdand or capital punishment, B. Arthdand or fines, C. Vagdand or verbal punishment, and D. Moral disapprobation. Pali texts inform us that Brahmin is not given a privileged position in the eyes of law, and if a Brahmin was a criminal, he was sure to be executed.